When I was 14 years old, me and my brother, who's 11 years, visited my grandma's house in the summer. On the third day, we were playing some games with our friends until around 6 o'clock, and we went to the grandma's house to take snacks, but there was no one in the house. We took some snacks though from the fridge and started playing cricket with an exam pad and a plastic ball. My brother stopped playing and stared at the window for like 7 seconds. I asked him what's wrong and he said nothing. And we start playing again for some time. My brother then stopped the game again and starts crying and said to me to look at the window, but I don't see anybody. And he starts crying even more loudly, saying that there's somebody looking at us from outside the window. I go and look but can't actually see anything, but he was still trembling with fear. I look at the window once again, though this time with more focus, and I can see a black head or something. I don't know what it is, right at the corner of the window, and it's staring at us, and then slowly hid by moving from the right side out of view, and I can see that it's definitely a person, or at least the shape of somebody, but impossibly black, almost like the kind where no light can escape whatsoever. Now at this exact moment, there's suddenly the sound of a plate falling from our kitchen, which doesn't make sense. Nobody's there. Out of fear, I grab his hand and we run to the room, and then wait for about 30 minutes there. I can see the window from outside, and there's nothing there. My brother slowly stops crying and I say to him, "What did you see there?" And he said he saw a very dark hand grabbing the bottom window, waiting for somebody there, clearly. We then wait for our grandma to return and we told her the story and she thinks it's a cat and quickly dismisses us. But I know what I saw. Now my husband and I were camping in the Badlands National Park one October a few years ago. The entire park was nearly abandoned since peak camping season had ended, but we were fine with that. It felt secluded and exciting to us. Now, if you haven't been there, Google a picture and you'll see it's breathtaking. Now there's no towns to speak of, only a small village nearby where there's a school, a church and a few other shops and hotels for tourists. Now during the night time it would get dark, so you can't really see your hand in front of your face, that dark. The first and only night we stayed there, my husband and I met the ranger on duty who warned us that it's only going to be us staying there that night, and apparently the ranger's cabin was far from where the site we are, so if we run into trouble it might be some time before they can get to us. But we're both experienced campers, so this news didn't really worry us at all. It just made the prospect more exciting, I guess, being alone in such a beautiful place. After we set the tent up and cooked our dinner, we decided to get set up inside the tent since we're coming off a long day of driving and are pretty exhausted. We walked for a while before I heard a heavy, regulated breathing that told me I was the last one awake, and I noticed how profoundly quiet it is outside. We lived in Chicago at the time, so I should have thought this silence would be a welcome change, but it didn't really change anything, just unnerves me deeply. A few hours later, I'm jolted awake, only to feel the alert of my husband standing up next to me. He was listening to something. Almost immediately I heard what must have awoken me, the frenzied beating of like 100 drums. We held our breath as we listened for what felt like hours, but it never wavered, never lessened. In fact, it got louder and louder. Eventually we both laid down and tried to fall asleep, but neither of us could. We left at the first light the next morning. As we left the park, the ranger asks if we had any trouble. The ranger actually comments that it doesn't look like we've had any sleep. We both look at each other before deciding to say what we heard. The ranger stops for a moment before saying, "Oh, just have a safe journey back." On the way home, I looked up the history of the Badlands and found out about the ghost dance. It was apparently to reunite the living with the dead and rid the lands of the homesteaders who had taken it from them. We Didn't know much about what we heard that night, but we definitely felt that it was something paranormal and truly something bizarre that we experienced. Now this happened a few months ago and has been bugging me. I was out hiking and rappelling with a friend in the hills near Tombstone. I want to mention that I've spent quite a bit of time solo hiking and camping. I am used to hearing noises and brushing it off. Anyway, it's late afternoon and I'm the first one to rappel down. I got to the bottom and while my partner was getting ready to follow me, we heard a noise that I would only describe as a growl or snarl. It sounded like it was coming from the ridge above us. It was facing the cliff and sounded like it's coming from the right hand side. We both looked around and can't see anything. I encourage him to come down and even half joke that it's probably a bear or mountain lion. At that point, I wasn't even feeling that nervous. I figured that once the two of us are together again, we would be pretty intimidating to an animal. While he rappels down, I then hear a loud crash to what seems to be parallel to my left. At this point, I start getting really scared because it was getting closer and closer, and also somehow gone from right to left on an exposed cliff without either of us seeing what it was. He successfully rappelled down, and we both agree that we need to get out of there, and we still had a steep downhill climb to the car. We pack up the gear as quick as possible, and as we get our packs back on, we heard what sounded like a howler monkey. The noise was close and we could not see anything to have been making it. Of course it was from the direction that we needed to go, so we hauled down the mountain and got into the car. I know that it can be easy to let the mind play tricks, but we had the exact same account of what happened. Now this is a part I hesitate to put into writing because I know it sounds more insane, but we heard giggling and whispering next to us. Both of us heard this. I keep trying to explain to myself that our minds just played a trick. The first noise I would chalk up to a bear or mountain lion. Animals are stealthy and could run out in front of us, but we would notice. Well, maybe somebody had fell, but surely we would have seen it, so I don't really know what to think of this. Okay, so I live on the west coast of BC in Canada, about midway up the coast. So I was driving my girlfriend back to her grandma's house 2 towns over from mine, about a 2.5 hour drive on the highways. I had driven her home and spent most of the day visiting her. This town she's from is right on the coast. It's a port city. Not super important, but I want to point out that I spent the day there and now was getting ready to drive back home. About 25 to 30 minutes into the drive, I'm on the highway that runs parallel to the mouth of the river on one side, and the CN tracks are on the other, so it goes to my left, and then the road that I'm on. And it's kind of like a mini channel where the river ends. So I'm driving, and it's getting dark, but I'm not so tired or drowsy at all. There's a few rest stops along the way on the right, on the riverbank. I need to urinate, so I start slowing down at the first sight of one, and something scurries across the road. And that's almost all that happened. It was 4-legged, and at least from what I saw, like a bear. Somehow a bit different. It was black, like black, like unnaturally. No texture or anything, just void of light or colour. And it ran out of the bush, over the rails, and I was going slow enough that the wind and noisy highway was gone and I heard it. It sounded like a metal tapping as it ran over the ballast and rail. Then, almost like the sound of if you took a rod or rebar and stabbed it into the ground, then metal again as it ran in front of me. Its body was shaped like how people described a UFO, almost a flat disc shape, like an overstretched oval thing. Now it had no features, no eyes, no face, no mouth, that I could see at least. It ran across the road, limbs stretched out as it ran. Then it ran into the rest area, over the bank and I'm guessing to the river. I kept driving and I didn't urinate until 2 hours later after getting home. I tried to search up this thing online, but I've never had any luck. If anybody could help me, I'd appreciate it. And this thing was big, honestly. It was kind of like the size of a VW Beetle, big and fast. Now my girlfriend says that it may have been a ghost or skinwalker, but I've never heard of any of these around here. Maybe a wendigo, but I'm not too sure. Now, as far as I can find, the most reasonable answer is that it's either a cryptid or something of that nature that hasn't been documented before, or maybe even an alien drone type thing. I'm pretty skeptical about it, but I really don't know what this could have possibly been. Now, I was with two friends in my truck. I was driving and it was dark, but not necessarily late. Probably about 10 PM, we were traveling to Page, Arizona / Lake Powell from Durango, CO, to pass through to Catania, Arizona, part of the Navajo reservation. I had been to the Catania before, several years prior, with a friend of mine who grew up there. We spent the entire day just having a good time with his people, but as soon as the sun starts to drop, his mother and grandmother are insisting that we get off the res before dark. So it had a reputation as being weird, but lots of reservations do at night. Flash forward to me and my friends in the truck. Now we're on a long straight road with 2 lanes with classic red desert on both sides in daylight. There's another vehicle coming the opposite way and no crossroad in that area. There's another vehicle coming, and this is important because right before we go to pass each other, what I can only describe as a metallic thing went streaking right between us at a perpendicular angle, like literally feet away from our bumpers. It looked to be about the size of an SUV with no lights or any kind of discernible shape, but it seemed smooth. It's a weird comparison, but like a speeding bullet in Mario Kart. All 3 of us saw it, and I think the other people did too because they hit on their brakes hard. It kind of disappears out of view, and none of us know what it could have been. I work part-time as a park ranger, meaning that I'm called out whenever they need me, and sometimes I'll just back up the main force. I'm also not in the United States of America, so there might be some differences. I don't really know much about your guys' park rangers, but hopefully you still enjoy my story. Now, being out in the forest was something that I often enjoyed, but it could get incredibly cold where I live. You didn't always have to go far to find snow in my country. Whether that means it's summer or winter, there was always snow at least somewhere, regardless if you had to go higher up the north to find it. Now, where I was stationed, it was often snowy, but I didn't have any problem with that. It just meant that my normal was kind of being in the snowy conditions, but that wasn't really an issue. So I've really enjoyed this career, and it's something that I was doing while studying simultaneously. I found that it gave me quite a nice balance, and it was kind of like an adventure getting called out to go out into the forest and often search for people or just investigate things, and I found it really cool. I was never too worried because they would know where I was going and what I was doing, so the chances of myself becoming lost were pretty low. I remember that I got a call that I had to go out and search for a particular person that apparently wandered off the trail. So I head out. It's not really too dark at this point, it's just kind of nice outside, I guess, where there was a bit of a wind chill but nothing too bad. I know we can get some incredibly annoying ones where you actually don't want your face to be near anything, but this one wasn't bad at all. The good thing I found too is when looking for these lost people, they often didn't go far off the trail, and because we're blessed with snow, it meant I could just trace footprints, and that's what I was doing. I probably searched for about a good 40 minutes and I find some steps and I follow them. The steps just look like somebody wandering off the trail, and God knows why somebody would have went here. It meant that you had to duck down literally every 2 or 3 minutes to avoid getting a face full of snow from the low hanging branches, but each to their own, I would guess. Now I eventually find somebody up ahead and I can see them just wandering with some red coat on. I call out hello and they don't reply. I call out hello again and they still don't stop. And I wasn't actually meant to do this, but I actually just grab a snowball and lob it at them. Now it hits them and they finally turn around and they seem to be very surprised to see someone. I say, hey, what are you doing? You're miles off the path. We're looking for you. They then motion with their hands to wait a minute and I'm a little confused. I don't know why they've been ignoring me too. I genuinely consider that maybe they can't hear me whatsoever and they can't hear and they've just got lost or something. But they take off some headphones. They say what? I shout, hey, we've been searching for you. You know the park closed a few hours ago. And they say, really? I say, yeah. I say, where were you going? And they say that they were following the trail. I then explain to them that they shouldn't really go off the trail and how incredibly dangerous it is, and eventually they come back with me. Now this person says that they don't know why, they just had the urge to keep going, and I say that it's incredibly dangerous, but I do think this is quite bizarre. They're basically completely fine and decided to go off on their own little adventure, but I was just relieved to find the person and we both walk back together. Now we come up to a small bridge and I go across it first because they say they're a little worried. I kind of danced across to show that it was safe and I turn back and they're gone. I can't believe it. I think, God, are you joking? I've just rescued this person and now they've gone off again. Almost like if you found a dog that's your own and it's ran off and you have to rescue it, then it runs off immediately after. I wasn't too annoyed because there was still quite a lot of daylight, so I just head back and call out hey, and then I can find them. They're hiding behind a tree almost, gripping to it, scared to go across the bridge. Now a little annoyed, I say, come on, we have to go. Just trust me. And I hold their arm and we make it across the bridge. After about another 20 minutes or so of walking, we eventually make it back to the main station and I get them in and warm again. My colleagues just thanks me for my service and I say no, it's my pleasure, and I go about the rest of my day. Now the next day we get a call out again. This time it was only for myself, as the other person that did this part-time couldn't get out of their work, so I was on my own. Now, apparently there was an area that I needed to go and check out because people have been reporting hearing some strange sounds and seeing some weird activities along the lines of a group of people going out here, then not seeming to come back again. We were definite that they weren't hikers, and this was only off of word of mouth from other hikers that have noticed this, but it seemed pretty weird. Now no, I'm not one of them people that's going to throw myself into really dangerous situations, and I knew if something was up, or if they come for me, I definitely wasn't sticking around, and I wasn't going to enforce much of anything other than my own running away. Now, when I set off, things are pretty nice. It's actually a little colder than the previous day, which I didn't have too much of an issue with. So I set off into the snow. Now this time you can actually see lots and lots of footsteps, and I have a general area that I'm following. Now you could see that there was lots of other hikers here, but this was an issue for me because now it means that I haven't really got any footsteps to follow. I presumed that I was going to run into a group of people that were camping out here or doing something stupid in a hot tent they weren't supposed to, so I just continue on. Now this isn't what you guys say as a national park, but it was a protected forest, so I was pretty mindful of the fact that there shouldn't be too many people camping here. I eventually make it up to another small bridge where I can't see any footsteps other than the ones that I'm creating. I got up some steps and realised that this is a little bit bizarre because I haven't seen this before. I'm not really too worried about it right now though, so I just keep on going. I eventually come up to almost the boundary of the area that I'm supposed to search, and I do see the traces of something. There seems to be something which is darker colour up ahead of a few trees, but there's no footsteps and I can't really see much of anything there. I realise that there's definitely a structure I haven't seen before, and I'm pretty convinced that I'm looking at a tent here. I wade my way through the snow and I actually go off of the path a bit further now. You can tell nobody ever really goes up here, it's very far and there's not much to see here. The snow picks up a bit now and it kind of reduces my visibility, and it means that I'm not going to really see much of this thing until I'm pretty much on top of it, but that's fine. I keep on going and eventually I'm just about within sight of this thing, and that's the first bizarre thing. It's quite large. It's almost like a large wooden structure, but it's something that is not on my map and something that I haven't seen before. I decide that I should go and investigate it, and I'm pretty convinced this is something that the old timers used to use, long before I was born or even my parents. I can't really see much of this thing, but it's almost like a weird effect where the closer I get, the larger it seems to become. Not in the sense of perspective change, but impossibly. It almost looks like a 2-story wooden structure, but with no windows, just a door. This is pretty bizarre. I get very close to it and put my hand on it just to make sure it's real. I notice suddenly that things are weirdly quiet, but that's fine. Where I am, there's not many animals or insects, of course, so this is kind of normal. And I make my way around one side of it. I realise that this shouldn't be here, and I go to flick on my radio and report it in, but what do you know, radio's not working. It's no worries though, I just flip in another battery and I report in what I'm seeing. They ask me for my coordinates, but I can't seem to get anything up on the GPS. It's quite weird, it's almost like when I went into this kind of valley section of the park, or forest, whatever, that I seem to lose pretty much all reception. This isn't an issue though, and I just take a few steps back. I decide the best thing to do now is try and get a vantage point. I'm not going to go up a tree because I can't climb, though it seems like it might be a good option because I have to hike a bit of a way up a hill. I'm not sure whether there's more of these things, and it is a really entirely bizarre new experience for me, so I start to make my way up the hill. I don't see any hikers or anybody around, so after eventually getting up there and surveying, I realise that this thing seems to have just been put there out of nowhere, which is pretty bizarre. One of my colleagues reassures me, saying that yeah, there's probably things that weren't mapped out too well and not to worry, but I don't know, I have a weird feeling about this. After standing on top of my hill, I eventually come back down again and decide that I'm going to investigate the structure. No, I'm not feeling fear or anything, but weirdly I do seem to notice new footsteps that are somewhat different from my own. Now they aren't like normal footsteps, so it's almost like trailing along, but with breaks in the trails, if that makes sense. It's going to sound like a weird explanation, but it's almost like an animal's been skiing around here, but I know it's not that. I know the area well and it's definitely no animal that I'm aware of, so I'm pretty sure people have caused that. I'm a little bit concerned because they seem like relatively fresh tracks, probably a couple of minutes newer than my own, but that's fine. I reassure myself, yeah, it's just an animal like a rabbit and maybe it's just getting hunted or chased, and I decide to go towards the door. I give some knocks on the door and quickly stand back, expecting some people to jump out and capture me, but nothing happens. I'm not really sure what to do now. I decide to walk off and just sit in the snow close to a tree for a couple of minutes and just wait and see what happens. I don't know why, but that seems to be the best thing that I can do in this moment, just to hold off and just be nice and quiet and figure out what's actually happening. I drink some water from my canteen, and I'm almost tempted to light up a cigarette, but I know that's quite a stupid idea. I can suddenly feel my nerves coming on a bit stronger now, and that's actually what I decided to do. It's kind of out of character for me, and I don't really smoke much too, it's just my friend giving me a couple from when we had a night out not long ago, and I thought it might be a relaxing thing to do if ever I was walking through here. But I don't know, it didn't do much to calm my nerves. I decided that I should investigate, and I don't know why, I kind of felt like drawn to this thing. Now, while I get up and start walking, I have a moment where I suddenly go dizzy, and for a few seconds, I seem to have a change of scenery. It's like I'm watching myself walk on a different path, kind of like from bird's eye view, which is really bizarre. I suddenly snap out of it after a couple of minutes, and I presume that the cigarette rush has got to my head. After not long, I'm now face to face with the door, and I knock on it one more time, and there's nothing. The door also doesn't have windows, which is odd, but I have a little headlamp thing I can tie onto my beanie, and I do that. I put the light on, and I open the door. Weirdly, it wasn't locked, which I think is pretty bizarre, but when I open this place, there are some lights on. I don't actually need the headlamp, but it's bizarre, it's very barren. It's almost like a very large room with not much in the middle other than a table and a phone. I call out hello again and I don't hear anybody. I think maybe this is an old station and I'm not actually that worried, realising it's our own thing. I stand in here for a couple of minutes just trying to take it all in, and there's a strange smell. It almost smells like meat that's gone off for a day or two, but not exactly the same, and kind of just like really old wood. Now, my ears start ringing. I jump as I realise that the phone's ringing. I also notice that the phone seems very old. It's one of those that you have to kind of wind and dial up, but I've never really seen one in person before, and I think this is pretty odd. Not knowing what to do, I just stand there and wait for it to stop ringing. It doesn't. It goes on for a good 2 or 3 minutes, and I decide that, well, I should probably answer it, thinking maybe it is one of our stations and they've seen me go in here. I go and answer the phone and say hello. There's no reply, and nobody says anything for a good couple of seconds, and then I slowly hear a voice saying, "I know what you're doing. Run." And then say hello. "No, this is one of the workers on duty. What are you talking about?" And the line goes down. Realizing that something's definitely off now, I put the phone down and my vision goes a bit blurry. I realize now that my hands are shaking, and I slowly turn around and walk out of that thing. I then start walking back the way that I've come, almost frozen in fear of what's just happened. I walk up to the hill where I was before, and I lay down now. I put my hands on my head and I just lay there for a couple of moments. That's when I hear voices. Now, they weren't too close to where I was, but I can definitely hear people talking. It sounds like a group of people somewhere much further away from where I am. And with that, I slowly get up. I look in all possible directions, but I can't see anyone. I do realise that I need to get out of here now, and I start walking very quickly through the snow, uphill. I make my way downhill and eventually back onto another path that we use just for staff members now. I quickly get onto the radio, finally get my senses back, and I very quietly say what's happened and that something's definitely off. They keep asking me for my position, but because of my fear and my handshake, and I'm really struggling to operate the GPS, and I'm really struggling to get a signal at that. I can kind of get one bar, but nothing's actually registering correctly, so I realise that I'm going to have to hike most of the way back now. Thankfully, they offered to stay on the line with me and reassure me that things are going to be fine and not to worry, that it's probably just an old cabin that we used to use and forgot about. But I keep telling them who spoke to me on the phone, and they're saying nobody. Why would we call you on a telephone when we've actually got radios? And that's when I realised something was seriously off about this situation. Now, I eventually make it back to civilization and where my ranger buddies are, and I hug them. They take me inside and get me warmed up. I then report everything that happened and tell them that I want to report this to the police and that something's way off. Now, they didn't take it too seriously at first, then they just said, oh, you've probably just gone out too far and got slow blindness and just imagined it. But I tell them I know what I saw, and I know my radio wasn't working correctly, and my GPS at one point. Eventually they do call out the police and they come, and I have to go to the station with them and report what I've seen. They say not to worry and that they're going to investigate it further, and some of the other rangers also went out to investigate it. But this is the craziest thing that I don't understand. Nobody could ever find that thing. Apparently they went to the exact area where that I saw this, and all they could see is a clearing, and weirdly, parts of snow that had nothing there, exactly where a building should have been, but no building. They actually accused me of clearing it to make up my own story to try and get attention, of which actually made me really angry. But I just can't understand that. They found nothing, not a trace of the building that I saw, or any signs of people. Only my own footsteps leading up to the area that was still in the snow, then coming back another way. I didn't know what to think of the whole experience. I still don't now. I just hope that by sharing my story, I somehow get some kind of therapy from this and kind of closure, but I still don't know what to make of it. I don't know who spoke to me on that phone that day or why, and I don't think I want to. I'd probably spent too long out in the woods because I become incredibly comfortable out there. Every so often, I'd hear or see something that I couldn't explain, but it never really unsettled me. Now, I really had a knack for being out in the winter. I don't know why, I just really liked it. There was something about being out and the added silence that really was something I found peaceful. What made it all the better was the fact that I had a beautiful house that my family owned that was surrounded by miles and miles of forests. Now this house was quite some ways up a hill, and it was somewhere that I loved going to. It wasn't necessarily modern, and you actually had to use a stove fire, I think that's what you call it, to stay warm. We'd even use candles sometimes to stay warm up there. Now, I remembered when I was a bit younger something weird that happened. Now, I'm gonna have to tell you this from my dad's perspective because I don't really remember it clear enough, but this is what my dad said happened. So we're staying up there during one winter, just because the place is so beautiful, and to try and have a nice family holiday. I was working really hard at the time and I needed the break and clearness, so we headed up there. The first couple of days were absolutely beautiful, and it gets to Christmas Eve. We have all of the presents set up and a really nice Christmas tree, and this is a real one, not like the modern ones. We even have the fire going and it's really peaceful. My two kids at the time were really excited to see Santa Claus. There's my son and my daughter. Now, my daughter was a little bit younger but still believed in Santa, even does partly to this day. Well, that's a lot more than my son, which is why my story gets a bit weird. So, we put the kids in bed and it's just me and my wife laying there happy. Now, suddenly, my son runs in the room saying, Daddy, I saw Santa Claus out the window. Now, obviously realising something's completely wrong, I get up. I realise that my son's not just going to make this up, and I kind of panic a little. I run out to the window and I don't see anything. He says, look, Santa's gone off running. I open the window and put my head out and ask my son to show me where. I quickly close it and grab my son and run out the front. And, what do you know? There's a silhouette of somebody running off in the distance into the tree line. I scream out, hey, but they don't respond. They seem absolutely panicked and maybe injured. They were running a little weird. From what I can make out, they're very old and have quite a long beard, and there's not much else I can see, but this definitely wasn't Santa Claus. I chased off after them as quick as I could, but they must have really took off because I never saw them again. I wasn't stupid enough to get lost in the woods trying to track this person down, but I realised something's really off. I eventually go back to my worried wife and son and I tell them not to worry about anything. I then say, oh, Santa's come too early, almost like a joke trying to get my son to calm down, but it actually works. The daughter was also a bit upset but much happier after realising this. In their minds, I just chased off Santa and I was a monster, but in my own, I knew what happened. I asked my son to describe what happened and he said he was laying there half asleep in bed when he opened his eyes and saw Santa Claus staring at him through the window. I said how long was he there, and he said he doesn't know, but it must have been a while because he felt like somebody was there for quite some time. Apparently, he thought that maybe Santa was near and decided to pretend he was asleep for a good 10 minutes, just in case Santa was actually there about to deliver presents. Yeah, you can imagine how that made me feel, and I called the authorities, but unfortunately they didn't find anybody. So yeah, that was my dad's story, and now I find it as creepy as heck. From my perspective, it is literally just me waiting to see Santa, but looking back on it now, it really makes me feel sick. I hate the fact that things like this happen. I still have no idea who that person is, and honestly, sometimes when I'm out there on my own, I hope I find them just so I can give them a good beating, but I'll never know who it was, but it still freaks me out. Nothing too similar to that's actually happened since, and I'm quite grateful for that. Other than that, I had a really good childhood. Now, there's one other pretty creepy thing that I know that happened from when I was a bit younger, also related to this. Now, I had a friend who I'll just call Jack for the sake of this, who was my best friend at the time. Near Jack's house and not too far from the house that we had, there was a really nice wooded area. This was kind of secluded away from everything and I don't know, it just had a certain vibe to it and we had lots of fun there. One of our favourite things that we could do was climb up a really big old tree. I remembered we'd do it sometimes if we heard other people, just because we didn't want them to intrude on us and make us jump, or I don't know, we were just kids so we were a little bit worried. Now, earlier in the day, we'd been doing some stupid things. We'd been stealing some firewood off somebody's front drive. Now, when we'd run up on the driveway, one of us would keep lookout and the other would go and grab the logs. I don't know why we did it, we literally had no use for these things, but I guess it's just a thing to do at the time. Now, we didn't actually like the people who lived here, mind you, because every time we played games outside, they would get really angry. I remembered one time we were playing catch or something and the ball went into this person's yard, and this old man comes out, grabs it and literally doesn't give it back again. I mean, we're literally kids having fun and he can't stand it. Like he had nothing better to do other than this. Well, hey, now was time for our payback. Now, after getting as much wood as we could pretty much handle, without making it too obvious that we'd taken them, we head back to the tree. Now, we played a few games until we heard a voice screaming. They were calling out, hey, I know you're up there. Hey. So, what did we do? We panicked. I ran behind the big tree and immediately began climbing, but my friend Jack, he wasn't really a good climber and he needed all the help he could get. He started climbing up the tree and actually got a cut on his leg and started to panic, and I had to go down to rescue him. Eventually he was okay and decided to keep going higher. I told him not to and that it's a bad idea, but he didn't listen. I was in quite a good point, just out of sight, where I could peer around the tree and see what was happening up ahead. Now, there wasn't too much happening up ahead at first, so I actually grew relatively relaxed at this. Now, not too much longer later, we can hear the voice, but much louder. They say, hey, I know you're here, what are you doing? But this voice sounded different. It sounded far too deep. I also saw a couple of flashlights. It was now getting a bit dark and I thought, God, I'm really in trouble now, and I really hope that my parents don't find out. Yeah, it wouldn't have been the best if my dad had found out, because he actually warned me about playing out here, so I wasn't looking forward to potential consequences, and at the same time, I was willing to do everything I could to try and minimize the risk of getting that whooping off my dad. So I'm playing it safe. Now, they ended up coming literally to the base of the tree. One of them whacks on the base of it, saying, "Come on, we know you're out here," and my heart falls through my chest. All they have to do is look up just a little bit and they're gonna see me, and I can now see that it's a group of angry adults, until eventually they make their way. Now, we stayed up this tree for God knows how long, and I didn't make any communication with my friend. I knew it was a bad idea because it's going to be obvious that we're talking, and I didn't know if these people were waiting for us. I was 100% certain it was the people annoyed about us taking their wood. Also, when they left, I could see them carrying things which I'm pretty certain was a firewood, but I thought, well, at least I avoided my dad. But the problem is now that it's growing very late, and I'm going to get in much more trouble if I'm not home in time. I knew the best bet now was to say that I was going to stay at my friend Jack's house. Now, this is something I've done a few times before and that I actually really enjoyed during sleepovers, but today I didn't really want to have to do that if I didn't have to, but it was looking that way. Now eventually I say, "Jack, Jack," and I don't hear a reply, so I realise that something's off now. I say, "Jack, come on, where are you?" And I look up the tree and I realise that he's gone. Thinking, how could this guy have possibly gone further? I start climbing higher and higher until I realise that he's not there. I think, God, did he get captured? In my mind, this is the last I'm ever going to see of my friend, and I actually feel a little bit scared, and this is the first true panic set in. I eventually make my way down, and I actually hurt myself getting off the tree. I didn't judge the fall very well, and my God, I don't know how I didn't break my legs. I was quite frustrated at myself for losing my friend, and I knew I had to look for him. Now, I sat down, and it's very dark. I take one step and I hear a loud sound, which immediately I realise is a frog, and I calm down a bit. I realise just how jumpy I am now, and how unsettling everything's making me. It was getting a little bit cold too, and I wasn't really dressed too well for the weather. Now I start making my way in a new direction that I haven't been before. This is through the very high grass. Now, I make it quite a long way along here, saying, "Jack, Jack, where are you? Jack, I need you now. We have to go." Now, the last thing that I wanted to do was go out of here without my friend, but I really don't feel like I have much of an option now. I think, God, why couldn't we have just done something normal? And kind of cussed myself out for a bit. I continue walking, wading further and further through this tall grassy stuff until eventually I hear someone whistle. I drop down really quickly and turn back to see what it is. Now, initially I see somebody waving, but because of the fear, I can't really see clear and it takes a second for my eyes to adjust. Then I realise it's Jack, in the tree. He says, "Hey, it's clear." I say, "Jack, for God's sake, how did you get up there? I was just there." And he said, "Hey, look, I come down, just come back quick. Don't move another inch forward." And I don't. I then start coming back the way that I went, and I realise that it's quite soggy ground around here. Now, I didn't realise how much ground I'd covered because it takes me quite a long time to end up catching up with my friend again. He says, "Hey, come here." No, seriously. And I kind of think that I'm in danger again, so I start up the tree. I eventually make it to where my friend is, and I say, "Where did you go?" And he says that he couldn't hear from me, and he was worried that they had done something and couldn't spot me where I was, so he climbed down as quietly as he could and searched the area, then come back again. I tell him my perspective, and he says, "I don't know how we didn't see each other," and I agree. He then says, "Look, I need you to come up here." I'm a little hesitant because I don't want to climb up the tree anymore because it looks dangerous, but he offers to go down, giving me enough space to get up there appropriately and safely. I do that, and eventually make it to almost at the top. As I do so, A large part of the tree falls down and makes a really loud sound, and I'm clung there. I don't want to move any further up now because it's not stable, so instead I just look around. Now, I then see what my friend was pointing to from further down. Just up to the edge of where the grass is, there's a huge drop. Now, this is almost a cliff like I've never seen before. It's just pure blackness down the edge. I let out a large gasp and say, how did we not see that before? And Jack then tells me that I was literally only probably 2 steps away from going off the edge into the water below. Now, I know for a fact that I would have died or would have really seriously hurt myself and probably fell unconscious had I have kept on going any further. What really creeps me out about that situation is just a feeling of realization that I was 1 step away from being really hurt, but honestly having no idea about the danger that I was in. I was really mad at myself, like honestly. But eventually we both make it down again safely, and we decided to go and check how much of the wood they've actually taken back. Jack and I then half joke about actually taking it back again, but we decided to leave it for another time. Now weirdly, we get to the exact spot where the wood should be and it does look different. We have a look around until eventually we find the pile. Now weirdly it was exactly where we'd left it before, but also there was an old busted out computer now next to it. You could see that somebody really had a go at it with a hammer, which we thought was pretty bizarre. We then realised that this is probably what the group of guys were after that we saw earlier, and we suddenly realised that it wasn't the old person that we didn't like or his friends trying to get the wood back, and that gave us chills. Now we're so unsettled by the realisation of this that we actually decide to put the wood back where it was, just so, I don't know, everything is as it seemed before. We kind of want to remove our traces and steps of ever being there, but we realise that it's not really possible. But we still do it anyway. We didn't really say many words and just gave our goodbyes, and I started the long walk home then. I actually lived on the other side of town where we are, and it took quite a while to walk back. Now I can tell you that that walk back was one of the most scary of my life. I was constantly looking around, half expecting them to find me again, and I was actually planning escape routes in case that happened. There was 2 ways that I could go back. One was through a main road and the other was near a big hill, and I decided to go through the big hill. It's just a bit more of a stealthy option and it just made me feel safer, and safety is really important at this time. I eventually made my way back home and I get berated off my parents for coming home so late. I say I'm really sorry and that I was going to sleep over at Jack's house, but I forgot our number to inform my mum and dad, and I got banned from going out to sleepovers or going to see Jack for a number of months, and that was quite frustrating. But I guess it was kind of the best situation out of what had happened, because I don't know who those guys were out there, or what they were doing with the computer, or who they were looking for, but the whole situation just seems messed up. I'm just glad, like really glad that I didn't fall. And another side note thinking of it is if I had have fell not expecting to fall, I probably would have especially got hurt because I wouldn't have been able to brace myself whatsoever. You know, if something falls on you and you don't see it, it hurts so much more. Yeah, just like that. Now those are probably the most creepy experiences that I had during my childhood. Now I have to bring you to one much closer. Now this happened around 2 years ago, and it's something that I still think about to this day. Now there's a few different cave systems near where this house is, and they're ones that I often didn't explore. Now there's obviously good reasons for this because it can be incredibly dangerous, but I don't know, it can kind of be enticing sometimes. And one time that I was staying up at the house on my own, I decided to go and investigate. Now it was my fault for not having enough of a structure and kind of losing focus on what was actually important in life, and I thought, hey, why don't I go and explore a cave that I know is kind of creepy and might be an interesting thing and give me something to talk about. and yeah, I got those things, but not how I wanted. So I set off one morning. It was pretty cold out, and there was actually snow everywhere still at this point. Now that wasn't too much of an issue, and I actually had some snowshoes designed just for this. Now they were still a little wet from the previous day, but that doesn't matter. There was lots of different kinds of trees and shrubs around me, and there was kind of a few natural paths and breaks in the trees. Now there wasn't any snow falling currently when I set off, which is a good thing, and everything is silent, and that's just how I like it. Now I don't have to get too far until I'm just to where the cave should be, and what do you know, bingo, I find it. Now this cave is basically a big hole in the ground, which I guess most of them are, but there's not kind of like a doorway. There are some rocks which kind of separate it into 3 sections, and I decided to gauge how deep it is. I grab a rock and throw it in, and I don't hear it at first. I realise that it's a pretty deep one, but there's pretty good ways to get down the sides of it, which I actually follow. Now, this cave is quite a lot warmer than outside, and I kind of realise why the cavemen like caves. I had done some caving before, so I wasn't too worried about setting off now. I also had my torch attached to my head, and a few spare ones, which are really important for when you're doing anything like this. When I went in, I thought I was going to find all kinds of cool things, but there wasn't really too much to see at first. Now, I knew this cave wasn't supposed to be too deep, and I liked that. I go to one area, and I can see some really beautiful rock formations which are coming up and dripping down from the ceiling, which I found really nice. Now there were actually some spiders that I saw, and I really don't like them, so I decided to continue on. I'm not going to go too far because obviously I'm on my own and I don't want to get lost in here. Now that's one of the stupid things that I'd done, was I didn't inform anybody of what I was doing. I remembered that at one point there was a very strong and sudden wind chill, which I thought was really odd. I hadn't felt anything like it, and I don't know why it just come on so suddenly. Now this was really cold, like noticeably colder than the surrounding parts, which I thought was bizarre. Now I continue on anyway, and I come up to an area where I see something odd. There's a chain swinging on its own. I don't know what this chain is or why it's there, but it's almost self-powered. I wondered whether it was actually a machine or something that somebody had left in there, because I knew nobody else was there but me. I do a quick hey, hello, and I don't hear anything. I think this is pretty bizarre, and I call out again, almost convinced that there should be somebody out there other than me, but no, there's no one. Again, I think this is rather bizarre, and I continue on. I'm almost at my endpoint now, and I don't want to go much further, and I basically avoided the chain, thinking that it's something that could be explained. Now at the time it didn't hit me how creepy that was and how bizarre it was that that was left in there. I just thought some other hiker had been in there, or explorer like me, and just left some of their equipment there swinging, and I thought maybe it was somehow motorized. I guess I just wasn't thinking. Now eventually I hear a whipping sound, and I hear that it's coming from behind me. I turn around again and realise it's from that chain that I heard before. I'm now convinced someone's in here with me, and I realise that they may need help. I then turn around and go to where the chain is, and it's still swinging like before. I then go up to it, and weirdly, I can see that there's nothing to make it swing. I hold it for a second and let go, and it suddenly stops. Now at this point it wasn't swinging so fast, but I was almost certain that it shouldn't be moving like this, and I'm looking for someone who might be in danger or need help. I call out hey, and again I'm just met with echoes. I use my other torch now so I can see a bit better, but there's still no one. Annoyingly too, I actually cut past my head on one of the things hanging down from the rock formation above me. It's not a big cut, but it's annoying because I'm worried it's going to turn septic. I then decide that now is probably a good time to get out of here and start heading back, when I hear something. It almost sounds like a low growl, but it's only for a second and I can't be too certain at what I'm hearing. I think this is pretty weird, and I think maybe there's an animal that's got lost in here. Ah, yes, that would make perfect sense. An animal's probably come and brushed it, and I've just been in here creeping myself out. And I decide to continue. I think that I'm getting out here and I don't have any time for it. But then I hear the sound again, though this time it sounds more like a moaning. Now, I'm not entirely convinced that what I'm actually hearing, it kind of sounds like an animal, but it kind of sounds like a person too, so it's pretty hard to figure out what this is. I'm trying to figure out where this sound is coming from, but it's really hard to approximate because of the echoes, until eventually it grows a bit louder and I know where it is. It's somewhere in the inky blackness, not much further ahead. Now I've got to figure out what this is. The curiosity was kind of killing me now, and I take my first few steps towards it. Now the first I noticed of it is when a shadow was cast from my torch. I can see the silhouette of something. Not exactly certain if I wasn't looking at another rock formation. I edge closer, and that's when I see it. Hunched over, in the shape of an elongated human body, is something almost in a praying position. I look up and lock eyes with whatever this thing is, and I see some piercing dark red glowing back at me as my flashlight illuminates whatever this thing is. Now in a split second, I turned around and was bolting out of there as quick as I possibly could. Now I didn't have much time to think. I was like a trapped person with a wild animal trying to get back desperately. What I saw I can only describe as a half human, half statue, half creature, which was really too long and skinny. It had some human features, but I couldn't make out much of a mouth or anything. Just these absolutely disgusting, demonic looking eyes. Now I've done lots of research since trying to find anything similar to what I saw, but I just can't find anything. Now, of course, none of this is going through my head while I'm sprinting back, but I just have this terrible feeling. You know, like when you're running in a nightmare and you can't get away quick enough and your legs aren't moving? Well, imagine having that but also being trapped in a cave and trying not to get lost. Yeah, it was really frustrating. I looked over my shoulder every so often and I can't see anything. But every so often, ever so faintly, I can hear a weeping sound. I don't know whether it was getting closer, and I don't know where it was coming from because of the echoes, but it was sure as heck there. Now in my desperation, I get stuck. I get my arm half wedged in one of the lodges on the way, and I can't get it out. I keep pulling and let out a kind of quiet muted scream as I'm punching my arm, desperately saying, "No, no, no, come on." I keep glancing back every couple of seconds just to make sure whatever that thing is hasn't moved an inch, but I can't see it. I keep punching until eventually I free my arm and unfortunately cut it in the process. I got a nasty gash on my forearm, and again I'm worried about it getting infected. I've now made it about 3/4 of the way out of the cave, and I'm starting to see some lights. The rocks are incredibly jagged in this area, and I'm not going up the way you should. I'm going up the quickest way that I can, and I pay the consequences. As I start climbing the final ascent, some of the rocks fall off, and again I cut my hand. I'm not too worried about it right now, and I'm just desperately trying to get away from this thing. I have to stop for one moment to catch my breath and get ready for the last pull which I need to get up, and that's when I hear it again, the weeping sound. It didn't sound closer than before, but it's still there. I give myself one last pull, and eventually I'm freed from the cave. I climb out as quickly as I can, and I'm constantly looking in all directions. I don't feel like I'm out of danger whatsoever, and I don't know if I'm going to get chased again, so I decide to keep moving quickly. I look back and I notice something dripping down, and to my horror I see blood. I don't know what it is or why it's there when I suddenly realise that it's my own blood and that I need to get back to help quickly. So I continue going through the woods in the cold, feeling very scared on my own, trying to get back to civilization. I have quite a way to go, and I keep telling myself, you're so stupid, you're so stupid. Why on God's earth did you do that? Why did you go in there alone? What did you benefit from this? And I don't know, I just felt kind of a deep shame and fear. I don't stop looking behind myself, trying to figure out where this person or thing was. Now, I eventually make it back to the house and I manage to patch myself up not long before I get into my truck and drive over to the hospital. They give me some shots and help patch me up even better, and that's because I wasn't sure exactly what I'd been cut on. They were worried that it was rusty metal or something like that, and all the other nasties. They asked the same question that I asked myself, which is, why did you go in there alone? I say I don't know, I just felt drawn to it, and I don't actually bother telling them about what I saw. Now, I eventually make it back to one of my friend's houses, and he asked what the cuts were about, and I just made up some excuse. I really didn't want to think about what had happened again. I really pained myself even doing it for this writing. Now, I don't know if the events that I told you about are somehow linked, or whether the creature that watched me through the window is the same one that I had seen in that cave, but whatever I saw, I know wasn't a living person like you and me. I don't know what it was, and it really haunts me. I've worked a couple of jobs, and my current one's completely different to the one that I used to do. I was a fire ranger for a little while, but I ended up giving it up because I didn't really like the isolation, and there was just other things on my horizon. Now, at the time, me and my current girlfriend, now wife, had decided to go out on a trip to a park. There was lots of deers and mooses and other animals I actually wanted to see, so I happily obliged to go with her. Now, to get to this park in the first place took a long time, and I had quite a lot of water with me because from my training before, I was always cautious of us becoming dehydrated. We had to follow a really big brick wall to get into the entrance of this place, and it was weird because this wall didn't actually show up on our maps before. We eventually make it to where we want to go, and we realise that there's a trail that takes you off into the woods. I believe it was a national park, but I can't be certain, but it looks really nice, so we decided to head out this way. We had some carrots and other things with us at the time so we can actually feed the animals. And I'm a little cautious, but I think it's best if we just try and throw some carrots at them. My girlfriend also brought some oats or things like that for them to eat, and we were just having a nice day. Now, we did see some people initially, but the further we went on, the less likely that it would be we'd see anyone, and eventually there's no one but us. We eventually come across some pretty small deers. There's mostly females with a few males, and apparently during this time of year they can actually be a bit dangerous. I didn't notice it at the time because I didn't care too much about researching it, and we see some and I try and throw some carrots at them. Eventually they start eating it, which I think is quite funny. Now, while I'm crouched down, I notice a really foul smell, and I think maybe one of them has something wrong with it. It's pretty weird. I look around and I can see some much bigger animals now just further off. Nothing to worry about, maybe it's just a moose or something, and I decide to keep on feeding these deers. I do this for a while, and eventually one of the males comes walking towards me, and it actually worried me a bit because he wasn't big, but he wasn't small. I was half ready to have to fight, but he just come up and took one of the carrots off me, and I thought this was quite cute. Now we're feeding them for a while, and eventually they all seem to run off somewhere, and we decide that we want to go a bit further. Now we had some supplies and we decided to eat. I had some sandwiches that we had made before, and I'm very cautious about how I eat it because I'm quite germophobic and I don't want to get any of that nasty stuff on my hands. Now after not too long, we decide to head off again. We're now going quite a lot deeper into the woods now. We don't really have a direction, but I know roughly where we come from, and I'm pretty good with my bearings because of my previous work as a fire ranger. Now, I make it a bit further in, and we have to stop because my girlfriend needs to pee. So while this is happening, I go off a little bit further just to make sure nobody's around, because I knew we'd get in trouble for that. I look up ahead, and there seems to be another moose. This one again is much bigger than all the others, and it appears very white, almost too white, and I'm very curious about this. For some reason I have a gut feeling not to approach this one, though I do have my carrot in my hand at all times. It sounds silly, but this actually made me feel much more safe. Now eventually this moves behind some trees, but I always keep an eye on it. My girlfriend comes back and says that, oh, I can see it too, and wants to go and feed it, but for some reason I have an idea that we should just stay back. It gets closer and closer and seems to come weirdly close for what's normally a very timid animal. It eventually goes off. I thought that was pretty bizarre. I know to keep my distance, so. Now sorry if I do get these mixed up, because I can confuse deers with moose because they all look exactly the same to me, but you know what I mean, just like the deers with the horns and stuff. Well, only the male ones, but you get the point. Now eventually this goes off and we follow up roughly where this has went. We think maybe there's going to be a nice family of them and we're going to be able to get some nice pictures. My girlfriend also brought her camera with her at the time, so there's lots of things we can take pictures of. Now the trees are quite dense on either side of us, so I know that if there are any, they're probably not going to be able to run and charge or do anything like that. So I feel a little bit safer. Now although this is about November time, it's really beautiful outside and really nice and sunny. Now I'm feeling a little bit dehydrated and I start to feel a headache come on, so I just slammed some water. The only problem is it made me need to pee like a racehorse and I can't stop now. But I notice every time that I'm stopping to pee, I have a feeling that I'm being watched. I know it sounds a bit cliche and everybody seems to say that, but I don't know, it just felt different again. Almost like there was something different here. I could almost cut the tension with a knife, but I didn't decide to tell my girlfriend that and we just continued on. We've heard that there should be a lake close to here, and my girlfriend wants to go and feed the ducks and things there with some bread that she bought. To be honest, I wasn't that interested in it, I was just kind of happy to be outside and felt quite peaceful. Now it took a long while before eventually we can see something. We can hear some grunting sounds and we both stop. Dead up ahead of us, one of these deers or moose, whatever it is, comes sprinting up ahead of us. It goes right past us and my god did that thing get close. I was actually quite scared because how big this thing is, and it runs off. It was almost like it was being chased, and then we realised it was. Another larger one actually comes past and runs after it. I thought that was pretty bizarre because it seemingly come out of nowhere, but it was definitely enough to put me on edge. There wasn't much I could do to defend myself. I mean, I could have a big stick, but it's just going to snap off, and I don't think these things would go for me. I have a carrot though, thinking they're probably just angry and hungry, so I can always throw that on the ground if needed. We eventually come up near the lake and it looks absolutely beautiful. Now, there's no ducks or anything, so we just keep going now. We stop for a moment to eat some more food that we had, and that's when I hear it. I can hear the sound of somebody calling out. It sounds just like my girlfriend, and I say, "Hey, what'd you say?" And she looks at me, confused, still eating. I say, "Oh, nothing. I thought I heard you saying something to me." And we continue eating, I don't think much of it. I couldn't make out words, but it did sound odd. We eventually get up again and keep going. Now, we eventually make it a bit further, and the forest is really beautiful here. We decide that we're not going to go too much beyond because we don't want to be here all day, and I had quite a lot of things I needed to do when I got home, so sticking around wasn't really an option for me. Now we continue on into the forest a little bit further, and that's when I see them. Lots and lots of deers, but much bigger than before. There seems to be more males now, and also I heard something. There was clearly some other girl not too far away from where we were, and I can't make out exactly where she was. It almost sounds like she's calling out for us, saying, "Hey, come over here, come quick." I asked my girlfriend if she hears it, and she does, but weirdly, she doesn't make out the sounds as clearly as I do. And I say, "God, it sounds just like you, isn't that odd?" I know it can't be my girlfriend because obviously she's next to me, but this is pretty strange. And we continue walking. It's now I know that it seems incredibly bright where we are, and it looks almost too perfect. Almost like somebody's turned up the brightness too much, or contrast, I guess, on a camera. And I don't know, it just felt a bit creepy. It almost felt like not the back rooms, but we had entered the backwoods. It seems like the trees go on impossibly too far now. And I don't know, everything just feels different. Every so often, I'm convinced that I can see people up ahead. It almost looks like some of the trees are moving, but I convinced myself it was just my eyes and everything's how it should be. So we keep pressing onward once again, and now we never seem to be getting much closer to the deers. It's almost like they're not moving, but we're not getting closer. Granted, I couldn't see any sitting down, but I still think this is an entirely weird experience. Now, I don't want to go too much further, but I almost felt drawn in. And we'd come all this way, why not just get those pictures that we wanted? No, I wasn't stupid, I wasn't going to try and throw carrots at these things because they're much bigger. But I don't know, I didn't feel like I was in too much danger. Now, again, the colour of the trees seemed to be changing to a brighter colour, almost having like a golden glow, which is really bizarre. I looked around and this is the first time that I felt a bit worried. Everywhere looked exactly the same. It was almost like we'd been walking in a loop now for a little while. None of the scenery changed whatsoever, and that was pretty bizarre. What's more odd is that we couldn't see these animals that we were trying to get up to. It was almost like they'd just entirely disappeared suddenly. It's pretty bizarre. We decide that we should just continue on the kind of path that we can see. But again, that's another weird thing. It's almost like there was a natural path, like a kind of clearing, but there shouldn't have been. Clearly this isn't a trail that we're on, and we're a couple of miles away from where we started. Probably more than a few, but we seem to be walking a path. Now, the trees seem almost like if you ever played the video game Halo, but more similar to those, just quite tall, and just almost looking like they don't belong to Earth. I'm starting to feel quite concerned now, and I decide to stop and tell my girlfriend that, hey, we could chase these all day and never find them. My girlfriend says, yeah, and I keep thinking I hear that girl. We decide that now's a good time to head back. We stop for a moment just to catch our breaths again, and just to drink some more water. And it almost felt like I'd stepped into a dream here. Everything looked so beautiful and perfect, but it just felt so off. And I also didn't recognize the area whatsoever. It's like we'd stepped into another biome almost, and I didn't like it at all. Now, after deciding to head back, we get our things together and start heading off in the exact opposite direction that we come. Now, I knew that if we followed the way back, we should come back to civilization. And everything's as it seemed. Nicely now, the scenery seems to change a little bit and seems more normal, but the kind of golden glow doesn't seem to escape. I actually confirmed this with my girlfriend because I didn't think to mention it at the time, but she also said she experienced the same thing. It was almost like somebody put a filter on everything around us. Now we walk for a good 15 minutes and stop again. We're pretty much exactly where we started, just where the trees seem to be changing colour to that weird glow. We look around and again, everything looks exactly the same. There's only this path ahead of us that seems to stretch for miles and miles, but we've walked on this. How are we not getting any further out of here? I suddenly decide that we actually need to go off the path a bit, and my girlfriend's a little bit hesitant, but I don't feel like we have much of a choice now. So we continue going, and there's a weird smell again that comes over us. Now I can just about see what I think is the way back, and we continue heading up here. Now we've been out for probably half of the day now, and to be honest I was getting quite tired. My eyes were also suffering a bit because even though I had sunglasses on, it didn't seem to be helping with the brightness. And then I hear a voice calling out for help once again. Completely confused because it sounds like the voice we heard throughout the day. I stop and so does my girlfriend. My girlfriend goes to speak, but I make her stop and I just listen. I can hear somebody saying help, please help, I'm lost. And I look at my girlfriend and tell her to stand back a bit, and I go off to investigate myself. I had a feeling that it wasn't somebody actually lost because it just didn't sound right. It was almost more like somebody was following us saying it than an actual person in danger. It was either a group of people all exactly the same in terms of voice and tone, all lost at the exact same time, or it was something more weird. I definitely think it was something more odd than not, and I try and go a bit further up ahead. I'm trying my best to act brave, but I was really struggling. All I had was a carrot to defend myself, and I thought, well, if it's one of those things, I'm going to launch it at it. Well, if it's anything, I'm going to throw the carrot, and maybe that'll give me some time. I get closer and closer, and just off to the side of the trees that I can't actually see is a voice. I go to scream, hey, what are you doing? But my voice goes completely weak and I kind of scratched out a sound. That's when I see it. It doesn't really look like any of the other animals that I've seen today, but a much bigger version. And I can see this kind of moose deer animal walk out. But this one's fur looks a lot different, and his eyes look almost like a yellowy red colour. It then looks at me for a second, and I can still hear that sound. It almost looks as though it's coming from exactly where that moose is, not far from it, but the moose isn't moving its mouth whatsoever. And then it stands up, almost like it's about to gallop or something. Stands up very tall, probably 7 feet, and walks into the forest, and I'm not joking. I didn't even think it was possible for these animals to walk upright like that, and I start slowly tracing back. I can't hear the voice calling out for help now, and I quickly jog back to my girlfriend. She looks almost like she's too shocked to move, bless her, and I have to grab her hand. That confirms to me that we've both seen the exact same thing, and we start heading back. I don't know what way we were coming, but I know we have to get further from this. I keep on hearing that voice calling out for help. It sounds like it's getting further from us as we jog, but I'm sure that was coming from right where that animal was. We jog for quite a while, and we eventually make it up to a hill that I recognise. My girlfriend was crying as we're running, and I tell her that she's got to be strong because if you go a week now, it's going to be harder for us to escape. Now weirdly, there was no other animals as we're jogging, and that strange tone seemed to slowly fade away and the normal colours returned. Probably the strangest thing about all of this is the way that the colours were changing. It wasn't the colours of the trees, but like a filter over everything. Even the sky looked different. My girlfriend also told me that she didn't see any clouds whatsoever when we were in that area, but as soon as we got back to the more normal area, there was quite a few of them. We jogged back for quite a while and we eventually have to rest again because we've been going for so long. We make it back to relative safety and we stop. Both of us are there frantically trying to get our breaths back, trying to figure out what had just happened. And we decide that we should just keep going. Now we eventually pass where the lake is, and that actually makes me feel a lot more safe. Now while walking, I realise that there's quite a few mooses appearing and deer things, but these look a lot more normal. None of them have that weird look in their eye, and they're much more scared than we are of them. I think this is really odd, and I kind of collapse next to the lake. I then get up and realise something else is weird. There's no people around, like literally no one. We should have passed at least one other person by now, or maybe two, but there seems to be nobody at all. While laying there collapsed on the side, my girlfriend says, "Look, look." And I can see the hat of a ranger. Mind you, I can only see the silhouette of them, but standing perfectly on the tree line that we've just come from seems to be a ranger. I can't make out much of their face because of the shadow from the hat, but I don't know, something just seemed different. I go to wave to them, thinking that maybe I've gone somewhere I wasn't supposed to, and I can just say that I was a ranger before for the fire towers, but they don't seem to acknowledge me at all. Now this person does not move whatsoever, not even an inch, and I have this painful feeling in my belly like I'm gonna vomit, and I grab my girlfriend's hand and say, "Just let's go." I don't know how we wouldn't have encountered a ranger up until that point, but it's something I can investigate later, and we continue back the way that we had come originally. Now, I really need to emphasize that because of the adrenaline of the situation, it was almost like when you try and run in a dream but you're not capable of it, like everything's 60% slower. My legs absolutely felt like jelly at this point, and we still had quite a long way to go. It was beginning to get a little bit colder now, and we know that nightfall wasn't far off. We keep on going though, however, trying to be brave as we can. Now again, we start to see more normal animals, and weirdly there's nobody else around, but I realise that we've probably passed this place's closing time. Eventually I can see that familiar wall that I saw before, and I make a beeline towards it with my girlfriend. We eventually get back there, and we stop near the wall for a minute. We can hear the sounds of cars again near a road, and it's honestly one of the most refreshing things I've ever heard in my life. You wouldn't think something that's usually annoying could be so pleasant, but it really was. And we eventually walk back to where we had parked. In the car, both of us are in silence, until eventually I try and say, "What do you think happened?" My girlfriend then decides that she could call in to the station near there and see if they've got anybody out, and just explain what had happened. She starts to relay the story and says, "Can we talk to the ranger that's based there?" And they say then that none of the rangers are actually on patrol currently, and we figure out the timings and it wouldn't have made sense. The last they went out was early in the morning, before we'd even got there, and they'd spent most of the day back at the station dealing with their things. Then, after explaining what we saw, we get a stupid answer saying, yeah, they probably do that sometimes. Maybe it was just an injured one that you saw. I then asked to take the phone and speak to the ranger saying that, no, what we saw was one of them stand up and we both saw the same thing and its eyes just look weird. And they kind of semi-laughed and say, yeah, they get unwell sometimes and they can do weird things. He tells me not to let my mind play tricks on me out in the woods and just to get home safely. I try and continue my story, but he says, yes, sir, it's just have a safe trip home, there's nothing to worry about, we'll take care of it. And with that, the call ends. And I was really annoyed. I swear and hit the top of my steering wheel. And my girlfriend's upset now. It seems weird enough that there wasn't another ranger out there, but why were they denying that they'd actually seen anything out of the ordinary ever and that we're lying to them, basically? It almost feels like they're hiding something, or they don't want to believe it, or maybe they know something that we don't. But that part really annoyed me. We eventually make it back home and kind of passed out. I actually slept for about 12 hours, and weirdly, it was almost like my eyes were burned from the sun the next day. It was like, you know when it snows and it's too bright and it messes up your eyes a bit the next day? It was like that. And my girlfriend actually had the same thing. I want to tell you my story because I want others to hear what we had experienced. If any of you have had anything similar before, please let me know. It's just really odd. I don't know what thing I saw that day. I don't know if anybody was actually lost out there. Maybe it was a ranger trying to find a lost person, but why wouldn't have the ranger station known that? Who was calling out for us? I guess I don't know, and I probably don't want to. Now, I was somewhere in the middle of the White Mountains in summer when I walked into what looks like a scene from a horror movie. A person with zero hiking, camping experience or anything had gotten themselves into big trouble. It was around 7 AM when I found the campsite. The first thing that hit me was the eerie stillness, until I noticed that shredded under a tree was a desperate looking human figure, clearly attacked by something quietly whimpering. I put my bag down, grabbed my kit and went over to the person. They appeared like they'd lost a sword fight with somebody with 4 arms, with slashes everywhere. Now, I patched him up the best I could, gave him water, checked my map, and hightailed it to the closest road. This is before cell phones were super prevalent and barely worked in the mountains. Thankfully, the road was very close by, less than 2 miles, and I was able to flag someone down. They took off and I wait for assistance to arrive. It took about an hour until the rescue team comes, and I led them until we find the still unidentified person. I was sure that he'd be dead before they arrived, but it was wrong. I assist in the rescue attempt and actually help him get out of there. After cleaning myself up, I went on my way, leaving them my number to call and let me know what was up with the person and if they needed any more help. I got home 3 days later, and there was a message on my machine. The story is that the guy I found decided to camp one day, and he heard that he had to keep food hung from trees to keep bears away. Well, he didn't do that. He put it almost directly over his tent, not high enough. So the night before I come upon his site, a bear had used the tree and attempted to climb up the tree to get the food, and the guy had awoken and finds 4 black bear paws sinking into his body. The dude survived and swore to the hospital staff that he was never moving into the woods again and moved straight to the city. Now, I was hunting public land with my dad, several miles from anything close to a trail, so the day goes by and not much is going on. Weather's crappy and I'm not hearing distant gunshots, so I reckon the deer aren't moving much. I radio to the old man that I'm gonna head back, and we make plans to rendezvous where we'd split up in the morning. 20 or so minutes later, I was kneeling around the edge of a pond, stripping off the bulk of my camo layers. I was just messing around, putting my stuff in a bag and listening to music on my headphones. I can remember that I may have taken off my blaze orange hat, but I can't remember for sure. Now, I had my appropriate gear on to show that I was a hunter, though, is what I mean. As I was digging through my bag, I thought I heard the faint bass of somebody yelling, so I took off an earbud and I noticed that, crouched on the opposite side of the pond, there was a lone forest ranger kind of just watching me. I stood up but didn't wave, and I wasn't sure that he'd even yelled at me in the first place, so I didn't holler anything to him. We just kind of locked eyes for a few minutes. To be clear, we weren't doing anything illegal. My rifle was unloaded by that point, and we were following all the laws and regulations correctly. I hunched my bag over, pulled out my walkie-talkie and radioed to my dad. Yeah, we've got company. My motives weren't anything though. I just wanted my dad to come down and help me. Now when I looked up, maybe 15 seconds later, the ranger was gone. I mean, had completely gone, so eventually I met back up with my dad and started to tell him about what had happened. Yeah, as deep back in here as we are, he probably thought you're up to no good on that trail. Sometimes they get ambushed like that. As somebody who gets nervous, anxious around cops, it never occurred to me that I could be causing similar anxiety to them. But I still don't know exactly who it was or if it definitely was a ranger. So this happened about 20 years ago while hunting with my dad in northern BC. It was a cold October morning and it was still dark when we parked the truck and started our hike into a clear cut. I was familiar with the area as we had moose hunted there before. My dad went left and I went right and made my way to the top of the slope to get a better view of the clear cut. I found a stump to sit on and took up my binoculars and quickly found out that my dad had made it into the clear cut across the mountain. As soon as I spotted him, I heard something heavy move behind me in the forest about 40 yards away. Yes, a moose, I think. I then head towards the forest edge when I hear a scream like I've never heard before. It didn't sound human and wasn't like any animal I've heard before. It was so loud and I swear that my soul left my body for a couple of seconds. I turned around and ran down that clear cut as quick as I could. When I got to my dad, he said that he had heard it too and found me in his binoculars running down the clear cut, then looked up to the forest edge and said that he saw a big hairy human-like creature about 8 feet tall standing between two birch trees. It stayed for a few seconds and then slowly turned around going into the forest. We got in the truck and went home. Now we asked the elders and their relatives about it and they said apparently they're called forest guardians. It still scares the heck out of me. I used to work as a fire spotter in a remote tower deep in the woods. Now, at any given day, the only human around for miles would be me. For a couple of weeks, every time it approaches sunwest, I'd finish for the day, everything would go weirdly quiet, almost like clockwork. It stood out because it wasn't normal. Now, there's usually more noise around at that time of the day. Along with this, every time I left the cabin to climb down, there was some unnerving feeling of being watched. But for a while, it was only when climbing down. After that, I started to get the same feeling while on the ground, and it somehow felt much closer and more menacing. Can only liken it to knowing you're being watched or hunted or stalked. Not overly great when it's a 100-meter walk back to the car with nothing between you but you and whatever else could be out there. Now this continued on for another couple of weeks, but I started hearing kind of chirps and calls. They stood out as everything was dead quiet. Then, one day while walking back across the clearing to the car, there was a long, low guttural growl somewhere else behind me, and I noped out of there as quick as I could. And afterwards, I go back towards the car and the base of the ladder. Everything was like an open ground with angry sounding things. God knows what was lurking around. A few days later, when I was driving back out, I spotted movement on the upside of the road, looked down again as it disappears into the tree line. It seemed to be hanging around whatever it was until the end of the season, as still and quiet as it could be. I still don't know what this was, but maybe it was a skinwalker, but who knows. I was out at my parents' place shooting on an old range. After we're done, my friend went off to take a leak behind some bushes. After he was done, he says, "Hey, come see this." I walked in to see what he's looking at. It looked as though a canvas butcher's apron was hung up from a tree to form a kind of pouch, about 4 feet off the ground. There were blood stains on it. We then get a bit closer and notice that it had 4 or 5 deer legs, and it appears as though it had been cut right through. This is on private land and pretty far from any neighbours, in a place where none of them would have a line of sight on it. In order for them to be hung there, somebody would have had to take a hike at least 500 or 600 yards in open fields without being detected at all. We called the police and a deputy sheriff stopped and took pictures and took a statement. He then said it was probably coyote hunters, and he didn't seem to be interested in the fact that none of them would have permission to be here. 20 years later, and we never found out who did this. You're just another link in the food chain, but that doesn't really come across your mind until you find a half-eaten deer carcass and realise that these things are absolutely huge. And the strangest thing, I thought that I'd seen a plane crash. As unusual as it is, I was working alone on a remote hillside and I saw a plane, like a full-size commercial plane, flying below the ridgeline between the mountains. I thought it was going to crash for sure, but it didn't. It just weaved through and kept going. I thought it was weird because it didn't have any logos on it or any writing at all. Come to think of it, we're near an Air Force base and they were training pilots to go to Afghanistan, but it's still really strange. I'm someone who had lived up in the mountains all my life. I actually had my own place and I absolutely loved to be here. I never really paid too much attention to folklore or anything like that because, well, I'd never seen anything, so why would I believe it? Living up in these mountains can be good and bad, but honestly, it's like your own planet here. You cannot see anybody at all, and I mean that unless you choose so, which is good, but it can be pretty dangerous at the same time too. I didn't have any immediate neighbours. I'd have to get in my truck and drive for quite a while to actually see them, which is fine, because I don't mind being on my own up here. I know there's some people that can drive insane, but for me, I liked it. Now, I'd lived in some beautiful forest area too, where that I didn't have to go too far to get away from people even further. I really wouldn't see anybody when I walked on these trails, not only because of the fact that it was winter, but it was cold, like really cold, so you always had to bring a really nice coat with you. Now, I'm not from North America like most of the people on here, so sorry if I get any of my English wrong, but I'd like to share my story of what happened one day. Now, it's something that I can't really put my finger on even now trying to think of it. It was about 2 years ago and I've decided that finally I should share my story with everyone. So, it was one of those days that I needed to go on a hike just to get out of my house. And also, there had been reports of some people hanging around in the forest and I wanted to investigate. Just out of plain curiosity reasons. There was no reason for me to go down there, I mean honestly, but I just wanted to have a look around and see what was occurring. So I head out. Now, as I head out, I have my warm clothes with me and my torches and everything, and even some supplies in a backpack, just in case I got hungry. When you walk in the snow like this, it's normal for you to feel quite tired and for your legs to feel kind of like a burn. It's something I got used to though, because I'd lived up here for so long and it didn't put me off my adventure. I wasn't actually expecting to find anyone, so I have no issues. Now it is very cold while I start walking, and when I first come out of my truck I'm actually hesitant about if I actually want to go or not, but I think if I'm a true mountain person then it shouldn't affect me, so I head off down the first path. Now on this first path there's a really nice road, and there's pretty cool trees on either side of me. They're very skinny obviously because it being winter and they don't have any leaves, and it means you can actually see quite far. Not miles, but decently, so you know if anybody else is out here. I decided that for today I wanted to wear some bright blue clothing because I want to stand out a bit from the background, and I don't know, if there was any possibility, as small as it might be, that I'd get lost, I wanted people to be able to recognise me easily amongst the background. Now, I didn't have to make it too far in before things got weird. I remembered pretty much immediately hearing some kind of screechy sound. And you know what I did? I laughed. Clearly someone out here was trying to play a game with me, or with each other. It almost sounded like the thing was on a tape recording, so I wasn't really bothered, and I continue on my walk. I think if anything comes, I am armed too, so I'm not afraid to take it out. So yeah, it's just me against the world pretty much, so I feel fairly confident. I continue on my walk down this trail, and the trees seem to get a bit taller now. They look absolutely beautiful like they always do, and I felt quite proud to actually live where I do. Not a lot of people get to experience things like this, and I feel like I was very grateful to God for being able to. I even get to see some lights in the sky sometimes because I'm so far away from people. You get a really good view of the stars and everything. I've even been able to see a number of shooting stars because of this, and again, it's something I liked. Now while walking, I come closer and closer to a big clearing up ahead, and this is the way that I want to walk. Now, I had a warm feeling while walking. I don't know why, I just felt like an inner peace. Now, I didn't get too much further down when I realised that the shrieking sounds have stopped. Yeah, it sounds really unreal. Not like anything that you'd worry about if you knew what it was, but still disturbing if you didn't. However, I wasn't worried at all. I just thought there were some idiots that got drunk out here and thought, oh yeah, let me play some games. Some of the local people here do things like that because, well, I don't know, they probably just get bored or something. I wasn't one of them, but I wasn't gonna let them take advantage of me, so I thought, well, what if I make them jump? Wouldn't that be funny? Now, it never crossed my mind that this might actually be a crazy person and that maybe I'll fight to the death, but hey, I guess you kind of get those thoughts in hindsight. So I continue down this path and eventually make it to a more structured area that actually has quite a nice little walkway and stairs that go down. Now, to be honest, I don't actually know how this thing stayed structurally sound. The wood it was built on was pretty good, but they never maintained it. I think that's one problem with places like this, is they only ever do some work in the summer, but it's never enough. If this thing had fell, I would have gone quite a long way down with it. I'm pretty sure some of the branches from the trees would have cut into the sides of me, and it wouldn't have been a good day if that had happened. But luckily it holds up my weight, and I needed to lose some, to be honest, so I was actually a little bit concerned about this happening. I eventually make it a bit further in, and I can hear a different sound now. This one's more like a moan than it is an actual screak. Almost like something needs help, like a sympathy one. Now, you ain't gonna get no sympathy from me, so I shouted out, still thinking there were these idiots out here trying to mess with me, and it wasn't gonna work. Now, there wasn't really any animals that I had to be worried about, so again, I felt fairly confident now. Now, I wasn't stupid. I wasn't going miles away from people and getting myself lost out here. I was just following the trails that I knew so well and felt comfortable in. And every so often I'd pass a little tag on the trees that made me recognise that I was going the right way. I don't know how recently they put them up here, but I knew I was still on the trail. Now the scenery was really lovely. There was about 5 or 6 inches of snow on either side of me. I could see it because on some of the wooden railings it kind of stood above the ground, and it just made me feel quite happy to be where I was. There weren't any footsteps, so I knew it was me alone here and it felt good. I'd even slide my way through pretending that I was skiing, but I realised it wasn't a great job to do that because my socks were going to suffer if water got in. Now I actually had frostbite before on my toes and it wasn't a nice experience. I remembered when I was a kid that I made some little den thing and I just left my feet in there and kind of relaxed. I wasn't doing anything. Now, eventually part of it fell on my feet, but I couldn't be bothered to move. I couldn't really feel my toes, so I thought that was just because of the cold, but I didn't realise that part of my shoe had torn and snow was already on my feet. So when I got in, obviously I had some form of frostbite and my mother took me to the hospital quickly and they were able to sort me out. But it wasn't something I wanted to experience again. If you injure your feet in places out this, then you're kind of in real trouble, because yeah, you can go on, but you're going to sacrifice your feet and you can't really crawl, because it's going to be incredibly slow, and secondly, you're going to get really cold, so I was ever so cautious of it and kind of cut it out. Weirdly, the further I was going, the less confident I was feeling. Usually I'm somebody who doesn't really fear much of anything, but now I've got to tell you, for whatever reason that was fading. Let's say it started out at about 90% and had dropped down to probably 30 or 40, which is very low for my standards. Again, I'm not letting this put me off, and I kind of have my ego take over and I say, you know what, I'm just going to keep going. I call out, hey, I need to come and meet you and your friends. Let's play hide and seek as a joke. I hear what almost sounds like laughter, but more of an animalistic sound. And again, I don't know what these people are doing. There was definitely people in here with me. I could just sense their presence, but my confidence was going down now. I decided that it's probably best if I don't stay out here too late, because I don't actually know what's out here and I don't want to be stuck here in the dark with whatever they are. The other thing is, if I have to hide, it's going to be a pretty hard job with my coat on. I do have a couple of camouflage coats which are more like hunters' ones, but in this particular moment I don't have that. I've just got my old blue one. And I'm going to stand out like there's no tomorrow, and I don't want to take off my coat to hide because obviously that would be stupid. I make it up to another one of the trail markers and I start to feel more normal again. As I'm waiting here, I hear a sound much closer now. It sounds like branches snapping off the side of the trail that I'm on. Now what's weird about this is that it would be really difficult for a person to walk there. And God knows how heavy they would have to be to actually snap like that. I mean, I know if I run and threw myself in it might make that sound, but not consistently. And that's the first thing that I think's a little odd. I noticed too that my vision's gone a little bit blurry now. And it takes a second, and I realise that something's walked past ahead of me. Now, I was convinced that my eyes were just watering for a second, but it wasn't. So someone wearing a white coat was up ahead and I think, I've got you now. So I actually jog a bit. Weirdly, I can see movement now, but up on the opposite side, which is bizarre, so there must be 2 people, because there's no way anybody moved that quick up there. I would hear kind of like a deep breathing too every so often. It was like somebody was trying their best to stay still but just could not control their diaphragm, and that's why I was hearing things. Again, I think this is pretty odd, and I do have my weapon with me, so I'm not scared. But I decided that it's probably not such a good idea to be playing games with these kids, because finally, after God knows how long, I know it's probably too long, I start to feel quite anxious. I decide it's best if I head back now, and I begin to turn around. That's when I hear a scream sound again, but much closer. I look out and I can just about make out some kind of eyes staring up at me, just from the ridgeline. This is weird. I can tell that they're wearing some kind of Halloween costume, and they kind of look like a monkey, but like more white coloured. They have these big jagged teeth, and I think, God, this is actually quite creepy now. At least they're warm in that thing. I actually started to make animal sounds back to them now. I know you're probably thinking this is stupid, and I bet it looks really weird from a distance. Yeah, so I did that. I thought it would make them move, and I start to charge towards them. I say something silly along the lines of, I'm the mountain man and you're the prey. I know this probably wouldn't have been good, because if it was anybody scared or lost, then it wouldn't hold up good in court, would it? I'm the mountain man and you're the prey. But I wasn't thinking like that at the time. My confidence was coming back to my head, and yeah, I should probably tell you that fearlessness was immediately fading. As I get closer, this thing looks almost too real. It quickly darts off again, but not at the speed that a human couldn't match, so I don't think much of it. I just think, God, there's some right weirdos out here, and I decide that I should just head back more hastily now. Because of all my energy expenditure, I've actually become really hungry suddenly, and I just want to get back home now. It's not like I was getting home too much anyway, because I wasn't working at the time because of the season. I actually work as a logger, but I could tell you a few stories about that quickly before I go on. Being a logger, there's times of the year that we can't actually work because A, it's too dangerous and the conditions don't allow it. I guess one weird thing that had actually happened to us is that one of my friends was working one of the machines when suddenly he just stops and turns back to me and says, something's wrong here, I can feel it. Not 2 seconds later, one of the machines sets on fire, and there was actually a massive fire that eventually spread to the logs we had cut. We eventually made it out of here, and my friend starts crying, and I say, what's wrong? He says, I had a dream that we died here in this fire. Yeah, it's pretty weird. I don't know whether he was psychic or anything, or if maybe a spirit had come to warn him, but that was definitely weird. It kind of unsettled me quite a lot, to be honest, more than I want to admit. But yeah, like I was saying, I worked as a logger and not much was on, so going home would just basically be reading or something, and I didn't really want to. But anyway, with the current circumstances, boredom should be the least of my issues, so I just continue on my way. That's when I get the first instinct that something's definitely off now. I could hear that sound crashing through the trees next to me. I can't really see anything, but again, it's through parts of the woods that are far too thick to be going through if you're a normal person not on the trail. And it almost felt like the ground shaked a little bit when this person was moving. Now, I couldn't see them clearly, it was almost like a blur out of the side of my vision. I don't know what you guys call it, but you know when you can just see out of the side of your eye. So I decided to pick up a jog now. I think that I can probably outlast whatever this thing is running, and I've probably jogged for about 10 minutes straight. Now, in those conditions, that was actually a mammoth challenge, and I'm barely able to do so. I stop to catch my breath, and I realise there's movement again, and I hear a screech again. This one is much louder, and now I realise something is definitely off. There's no way any person could have run through the woods like that parallel to me at that pace for that long. I mean, literally, there's no way that it should be possible. How on earth would they have got through the trees and all the twigs and other stuff laying around without making that much noise, but not on a path? I was barely able to do it myself, being quite a quick person and relatively athletic, but they did it next to me the whole time, and this clearly wasn't a person playing a game now. I feel a little bit better because where this thing is running is clearly off quite a big cliff, so now they have quite a challenge to get back up to where I am, so I feel a little bit more confident. However, Something in the back of my mind is just telling me that this whole situation is off and that I really need to try and get out of here. So I decide that there's not much else I can do now and just start walking back. I realise that where I'm walking's got a nice little path again and I can follow this up. But I wasn't sure what thing was following me. That's when something's off. The bridge thing that I was standing on now kind of collapsed up ahead of me, and suddenly reality set in. For a second I lock eyes with God knows what this thing is, but this ape-type creature covered in white fur, kind of looking dusty almost, is staring at me with these horrible teeth growling. It lets out the scream sound again, and I realise this is no person playing games with me. I suddenly feel very scared, and without thinking I quickly dart under a tree. I try and fortify my position and quickly kick some snow up ahead of me. I'm kind of hidden now in the bushes, and I take a moment to try and calm my breath and be as still and quiet as possible. I kid you not, I saw what looks like what I can only describe as a yeti sprint past, stop for a moment and start to smell. I dared breathe and I probably held my breath for about 30 seconds straight. This thing then goes exactly to where I was standing before with crashing sounds. I let out a slow sigh of relief as I let the air leave my body again when I hear the screech even louder. I now hear other screeches similar, and I'm pretty sure there was more than one of this thing. I don't know what to do now because obviously I'm not going to stay very warm in my current position, but what on God's earth is that thing? I really don't know what that could possibly have been. It sounds exactly like the things that I've heard about in our folklore, but they're not real. This can't be real. I keep telling myself over and over again in my head that this cannot be real. This entire situation is simply impossible. And I wait. I waited for so long that I begin to really shiver heavily, and I have no sign of whatever that thing is. I realise now that I have to step out and start moving again just to stay warm. Now I'm not joking, the second my head leaves the clearing, I hear it scream again just further away now, and I hear some sounds advancing towards me. I start sprinting. I'm not that far from safety now, but I can hear that thing coming. That's the worst part of it. The whole time that I was running, I can hear this thing chasing me, and I can't see it. I don't even think about the weapon that I have, just something clicked in my head. Some kind of calculation took place to make me remember that there's no way I can fight off whatever this is. I jog and jog until eventually I make it back towards where my car is. I quickly fumble for the keys and drop them. I punch my car in anger and that sets off the car alarm, and then I glance behind myself and I see it again. Those teeth, but it was like the second it had heard that alarm, it scared it, and it turns and starts sprinting off out of sight. I quickly get my keys and unlock my car, jumping in it, and I drove out and immediately skid a bit and have to slam onto the brakes. I've gone off the side of the road, but I quickly slam it into reverse and get back on again. It's incredibly dangerous conditions to drive in, and I might die if I'm not careful, so I've managed to calm myself for a few seconds. I look around and all I can hear is some wind chill, and the sounds of some snow falling off of a tree not too far away. Now I eventually compose myself enough to drive, and eventually make it back home. I ended up writing down everything that happened. I'm old-fashioned, so I wrote it with pen and paper, but it was almost like a therapy for me. I have never been to that area again, and I actually moved in with my family afterwards for a couple of months. I never told them what had happened, but I didn't think anyone would believe me. I want to share my story with you all because I don't know what happened those years ago. It just seems odd and something that I can't describe, and that really scares me. So, one of the things I'd like to say before my story is that I put the wendigo in quotes because I live in Central California in historically Milwaukee land, which, from what little I know about wendigos, is quite away from where they're normally seen. So, if someone knows anything similar, I'd like to hear it. But yeah, 2 years ago, I and a group of 3 other friends decided to go to Humboldt County for a weekend. We go, see Fern Canyon, tour the HSU campus, and have a fun 4-day weekend camping on the beach. On Sunday it's time to come home. It was a 12-hour drive to where I was dropping my friends off, which I drove for the entire duration of. By the time I drop them off and start the last hour of the long drive back to my home, it's a little after 9 PM and completely after dark. Now, the 2 routes that somebody can take between my friend's house and where I live is across 2 different bridges and over a lake. I decide to take the main highway, as it's a little longer than the drive on the other road but fewer turns to navigate. The difference between the 2 routes was only about 2 miles or so, and as I'm about halfway across the bridge, I notice in my headlights that there's something on the shoulder. I slow down a bit to make sure that I'm able to move over if necessary. As I get closer, I'm able to make out what it is. Standing on the side of the road was about a 7 to 8 feet tall, humanoid creature. It looked emaciated with a ghost white skin that stretched across its bones. Obviously, I wasn't going to stop and get a closer look, but I've stopped and looked in the rearview mirror now, and trying to see if I can see any features of it, but there's none. It had completely vanished. The rest of my drive home was uneventful, and when I woke up the next morning, I brushed off what I saw as exhaustion from the long weekend drive and the 12 hours of driving before seeing the thing. That is until Tuesday, when I was talking with one of my friends who had gone on this trip. She told me that one of her friends had been driving over that bridge and saw a creature exactly like I had seen. That was when I told her what I'd seen the night before, and she suggested it may have been a wendigo. Before then, I'd maybe heard the name of it once or twice, but didn't pay much attention, as I wasn't interested in cryptids or ghosts or anything really. But what I saw was definitely bizarre and something that I can't explain. Now, these are some strange experiences from a camping trip in northern Ontario I went on back when I was a little kid with my dad and stepmom. I want to preface this by saying that despite the things I've written about, it was still a good time. My parents split when I was younger, and I didn't exactly live with my dad. I still got to see him though, and these kinds of trips were a bonding experience where we always had fun. I just don't want that to overshadow the story. Now, onto the story. My stepmom and dad rented a tiny cabin in northern Ontario one summer through a family friend. I don't know exactly where it was, but I'm certain it was well in the north of Midland, the regular cottage country for Toronto folks. The cabin's on a lake, and owned by somebody who has a tiny motorboat there which is ferried up. There wasn't an island, mind you. I think there was just not any roads to access it. Some strange things happened on this trip, and while there isn't a single cohesive timeline here, I'm not an experienced writer, but I've specified things to make it clear. So 1, the owner had left a canoe at the cabin, and we took it out for a lot of trips to the lake, usually to use later in the day. I was obsessed with frogs and fish and wildlife as a kid, and this lake was loaded with marshes, so I loved these outings. I remembered one in particular. It was almost sunset and we were heading back through one of the marshes, and I heard a faint humming, similar to a transformer coming from the tree line to the shore. Now my stepmom/dad noticed it getting louder too. It stops all of a sudden a few moments later, but so did everything else. The sounds of birds, frogs, and any wildlife completely stopped. Nothing else strange happened on the way back, but it was creepy as hell. Now, the cabin was on the shoreline, but there wasn't any beach or anything close to one. It was actually a very steep and rocky shore around the entire area, but once you got into the water there was sand. Mussels and crayfish actually thrive in there, and my dad got the idea to catch some for cooking. Now, my dad isn't a woodsman by any means, but he's a very crafty and resourceful person. So we canoed to a sandy area close to the shore and waded in to catch mussels. On both sides of the water here, the shore was very steep and rocky, like 2 floors up with thick forest at the top. At some point during our escapade, I caught a glimpse of something along the trees on the opposite side of the shore. I couldn't make it out very well, but it was white, almost like the texture of birch, and very lanky. I remembered thinking that it was definitely not a person, but it wasn't too far from the general shape of one. It was staggering around lethargically and slowly. If it was an animal, then something was definitely wrong with it. I waded over to my dad and told him to look up there, and by that point it was gone. Because of this, I'm not 100% sure that it could have been a real thing or not, but I don't know, I saw it so definitively, and I remembered seeing it again on the opposite side of the shore on the way back. Now, this one I don't actually remember, instead my dad told me about. It was one of our canoe outings. My dad and stepmom decided to visit this little peninsula on the other side of the lake close to the marshes area. We all got there and dragged the canoe onto the little shore, and there wasn't a path, but the trees weren't particularly dense either, though there was enough to see water when you look back. Now, pretty soon, he notices that the entire place is covered in mushrooms, and live trees had given way to dead/drowned trees further inland. This was unusual because it didn't look like there had been a forest fire or anything. They were just dead. Now, it also started smelling like really, really bad, and not wanting to endanger us by going further, we all turned back. He didn't want to let on that he was nervous because I was young at the time, but he told me that obviously it freaked the hell out of him. We stayed clear of the peninsula for the rest of the trip. Now, this is something my dad told me happened to him during his trip a couple of years ago. He said that he went hiking by himself at some point, and he was deeper into the woods, and everything around him just stopped. No sound whatsoever and no movement, no wind or leaves falling. It all returned a minute later, and nothing else eventful happened for the rest of the hike. This one isn't really as scary as much as weird, I guess. Now, we spent most nights having fires outside. Now, one night my dad and I stayed up watching X-Files on this tiny black and white TV. I'm actually not sure how this place even had power since it wasn't accessible by road. Maybe it had a generator, or even a small PV/battery setup for all I know. There wasn't much other than a couple of lights, that TV, and a small water pump to the lake. Now anyway, I was young and X-Files was spooky to me. During one of the episodes, we both heard that humming coming from outside, like when we were on the canoe. It was faint, but definitely there. We went outside with a flashlight to see if we could identify it, but couldn't see anything. We didn't want to go into the woods this time, or take the canoe out, and it sounded like it was far enough away. But we just went back inside. Now, it was kind of intermittent throughout the rest of the night, sometimes louder and sometimes quieter. In the morning, our water wasn't working, and my dad went to investigate. Apparently, the pump power cable had been messed with, and it wasn't easy to fix, but weirdly strange. Now, this one is probably the most unsettling that I remember. I'd wake up earlier than everyone else most mornings because I get pretty hyped up to go out and catch toads and frogs and whatever else I can find. I even set a trap for a chipmunk one time and successfully capture it. I remembered one morning I'd just woken up before sunrise and was still in bed. Now, in the window adjacent to my bed, I see something that usually wasn't there. Now, it was half a face poking around the edge of the window staring at us, sickly pale orange with giant black eyes. This thing was definitely not human. I hid under the covers and eventually went back to sleep. When I woke up, everyone was awake, and there's no sign of anything being there. I always thought that this particular experience was just something I imagined, but about a month ago I met up with my dad while visiting my home city. We got talking about this trip a bit again, and he mentioned that quite a few times he felt uneasy on this trip. For example, my dad will usually go on jogs early in the morning. It's still a bit of a habit of his. He decided to abstain a couple of months and just stay in the morning in the cabin because there was something that he just couldn't describe and made him feel unwelcome there. I only connect this window with the incident after our conversation, but when I did, it really made me think about the entire trip and the one reason I decided to write a post about it. Now, I'm going to end this here because it's gotten longer than I expected, but I was a little kid when these things happened, but I know what I saw, and my dad certainly knows what he saw too, and I don't know, I just think everything's somehow connected. Now, sort of not related, but I was out in the country lands of Texas on this remote trail mountain biking that I like to ride when I'm in town. While riding though, I saw an older man ahead strangely, but I remembered he was looking straight up at the sky. I see him about 60 yards ahead. It's a single track, so I don't have room to get around him. I simply stop and he hears me brake, and he then turns around with his head level and looking at me. What happened next made my skin crawl. He starts talking and waving his arms, but his voice sounds different from how he looks. It sounds like a child talking and sounding scared, but obviously he's 50 plus years old. He keeps talking, but it's like somebody's playing a recording from his body with his arm animations and mouth not lining up correctly to the things that he's saying. I turn around and book it back to where I parked my car and left quickly. He could have just been a wildernessy loony with a child's voice, but I don't know. Something about it was just off, and he also doesn't have any gear or clothes that match a hiker whatsoever. Now this has been going on for a couple of years now, but it hasn't gotten to me until now. I work as a paddling coach in Canada. I coach canoe and kayak, dragon boat, standing up paddleboard and an assortment of other boats. I work year round, but when the water opens up, I work at a camp which is about 10 minutes from the city. The club is surrounded by deep woods and several other camps, and the plot of land next to me where I work is owned by some other facilities, but the camp only takes off about a quarter of the area. The rest of the forest is filled up with a spider web of deep woods that go on for really far. I used to train my athletes on the trail, but for a couple of years we weren't able to do it. Anyway, we go on the trails now every so often. It all started about 2 years ago. I was up the river coaching a dragon boat session. We were paddling along the side of the shoreline, and just as we're taking a break, I hear the most bone-chilling scream that I've ever heard coming from the woods not far from the shore. It sounded like a woman's, but sounded off, like really off. As though that she was struggling to get air or something. The whole boat stopped moving and stopped to listen. It was quiet for a long time until I asked, did anybody else hear that? A dragon boat holds 22 people, and just as I ask if everybody saw that, people nod at me. People were quiet for a while to see if it would happen again. This is the first incident that happened late in the summer, so I assure and assume that it was just a kid screaming at a bug or something. It happens. When we didn't hear it again, we decided to continue the workout. Just as we go out, however, it happened again. Still the same gargling scream just beyond the tree line. Again, everybody in the boat stopped and listened. Now I actually wasn't 100% sure what to do. I had never dealt with anything like this before. It was one of those things that you question constantly, not sure if what you heard was legit or not. I beached a dragon boat on the shore just so we can take a look. Everyone was guessing what the source of the scream is, and could not be going much further than the tree line, we presumed. A couple of the guys and me took a look around but can't see anything, and it was honestly a really chilling situation. We eventually all decided to call it a day and head back, and I assumed it was just a campground hiking in the trails, and it eventually left my mind. Flash forward to last summer. I heard the screams once again, but only a handful of times over the season. I can't say how many times, but it could have been more than 3. Each time it would happen, me and whoever it was there would try and figure out where this is coming from. This happened all over the summer. It was never just one part of the season. I wanted to say that this wasn't the only weird thing happening at the club. Besides the odd disembodied screaming, myself and others would hear a few different sounds coming from the woods by the club. This would include a weird rasping wind blowing through the forest immediately, followed up by the sound of what can only be described as somebody gutting a fish very loudly. It's so hard to explain, but I want to do the sound justice because it chilled me to the bone. The worst thing I've experienced at work is somewhat too common nowadays. It usually happens when I have a younger trainer with me. With this group, I coach mostly sprint canoe and sprint kayak, and the group ranges from 12 to 17. I train the kids after school, and sometimes we go late before the sun sets. Sometimes I'm stuck closing up the club in the dark with the kids, which usually is when this happens. From time to time, when it's just a couple of us out after dark, me and my athletes hear footsteps coming from the woods around us. They always stop just short of the tree line. It doesn't sound like somebody running through the trails or anything, but as if someone is walking through the underbrush. Just as we hear it, me and the kids always fall silent to the exact same place. This usually prompts everybody to drop whatever they're doing and hightail it out to the parking lot to drive off. Now, all of this would have been fine. I'm a tough guy, and I don't scare easily. At least I don't think so, but a couple of days ago, something finally put me over the edge. It's been an exceptionally warm spring in Canada, which has allowed me to start working on the water 3 to 4 weeks earlier than usual. I was out on the water with a dragon boat crew and we're paddling up and down, and it happened. Now, the scream sounded different now, still female but really demonic. All of the hairs on the back of my body stand up. The whole boat laughed awkwardly, assuming it's just another member from the club, or maybe just a member taking the hiking trails, but I didn't laugh. It hit me almost immediately. It could not have been another member of the club because I was the last there, and it couldn't have been any members of the other clubs because it's too early in their season. Theirs hasn't opened up yet. That was the other night, and I haven't decided what to do. The whole thing has put me on edge, and I haven't allowed myself to stay later than roughly about 8 these last couple of days. I'm not a usual on these kinds of places, but I've spoke to some other people and coaches about the screams who have also heard them, and none of us know what to think about it. Now, the screams usually come a couple of times in the summer, usually in 2s, but I'll try and record it next time. Now, my mum is a psychic medium and has always told me about her fairy haunting stories. I never really believed her and thought she was mistaking lightning/bugs or fireflies for fairies, but last night she began talking about fairy hunting again, and I decided to go with her so I could experience what my mum had been speaking about. Now, we're in Lilydale. They have a fairy trail in the woods, so at around 10:30 PM we head into the woods with flashlights. We get about half a mile into the woods and my mum turned off all the lights and starts talking and welcoming them in. At this point, I'm sketched out and feel super uncomfortable about being in the woods with no lights. I was expecting to see a bear, not really a fairy. I then almost instantly felt extremely calm and start to see these flashing lights around me. I grew up in New York and I know what a lighting bug looks like, but these aren't those. It was almost like sparks you see when you have a lighter. Whatever was making it was obviously flying because you could see them moving. My mum then tells me to look behind me, and the tree directly behind me almost looked like it had little patches glowing in the dark. They then began to flash light, and we would sing and ask questions. I don't really know what to make of this experience. I feel like it's almost like something I've never had in my life before. Another weird part about this that makes me believe we weren't seeing bugs is that we asked multiple questions like flash twice for yes, and every time we did we got a reply. There were about 2 minutes where we didn't see anything, and my mum asked them to show us their beautiful lights a few more times before we left. And they all started showing us the lights again. Thought I would share my weird experience, and I still don't really know what to make of it. Now, in Canada, we have a scout system similar to the US. Our system by level is Beavers, Cubs, Scouts and Venturers. This happened during Cubs, so there was this house on the property of the camp. It's a beautiful house, nice wooden smell, it was great. During this time, all the troops around us gathered for a weekend up in the house, so maybe 6 or 7 troops gathered. We'd be doing wooden car racing, etc. The house was split into 2 rooms, one for males and one for females, and the closest doors connects the 2 rooms. At the time, there was maybe 10 or 20 guys in one room and 10 to 15 females. Now we'd be sleeping on the floors basically, with our sleeping bags. Now after brushing, me and the guys went back to our room. We were talking and one of the kids said that this place is haunted, and that the closet that leads into the girls section is where somebody was hanged. Now I'm not gonna lie, I always had a strange feeling in that doorway, so much so in fact that I put my sleeping bag across the room on the other side away from it. There was also an air vent there, that I was afraid as well, so I then moved into the middle. Even if I had to sleep in between 2 guys, I didn't mind. That night, after the counsellor shushed us to sleep, because you know guys, we talk for hours on end and didn't get no sleep. Now it's maybe 4:30. I woke up, my head facing towards the closet when I noticed something going down. The closet door was slowly opening. I was kinda stunned. Girls shouldn't be peeping on guys. And then I see a shadow, no bigger than 6 feet. It was crazy tall for its size. Now, I can best describe from memory. It's like the colour Vanta black. It was very blurry but crisp until the middle. It slowly inched its way across the wooden floorboards and making no sound, nothing. It just silently passes each kid as it went by. I didn't want this thing to see me, so I turned my head. It passed more kids and went slowly down. I was now trembling. I didn't know what it wanted. It kept moving slowly, passing a few kids ahead of me, and then it happened. The more it got closer, the more I felt dread. Now not only did I feel dread, but I felt the air getting colder. And not just the physical feeling of cold, almost like my insides. The air was getting more cold and dry like liquid nitrogen. The greatest amount of that feeling happened when it passes me. I was maybe a few feet from the door, so when it went to the entrance I was at, I was terrified, and I literally saw it turning the doorknob. It pulled the door open slowly, exited before strangely enough shutting the door again. That morning when we were getting up from bed and walking down the rickety old steps, one of the kids says, "Did you see the shadow last night?" And maybe 4 of us said yeah. And we spoke about it for a short while and all agreed that everybody was in our sleeping bags and that nobody moved. and it couldn't have been any of us. I was camping in a little cottonwood canyon on October 11th of the last year with 5 of my buddies. We had a canyon party and it was super fun. The wind starts to pick up after the party goes on, and then eventually we get ready for bed. We're all sharing a tent, and we're about 1.5 miles from the road heading up the canyon in a very secluded area, when around 2 to 3 we start to hear this mechanical like THS movie intro sound growing faster and faster. The bass got insane and it felt like something was coming. All of my friends heard the same thing and it scared the life out of us. Then, as the sound was reaching its peak, it went dead silent. Then this huge rush of wind hit us. Now the next morning we all woke up to this huge stone underneath the top of our tent, right where we'd been sleeping. We then got out of the tent and realised that the entire tent has actually been moved about 5 feet. It scared the life out of us. I'm not a big believer of the paranormal or even aliens for that matter, but this occurrence was the first time that I had no explanation for it. Now, there was 5 adults sleeping in that tent, and there's no way that it could have moved that far on flat land without us noticing. Until this day, I get goosebumps about that noise. I thought I was dying. The noise lasted for what felt like 2 minutes. Now, I was dead sober while my friends were a bit tipsy, but I really don't know what this was. It's honestly like the THX intro slowed down on full volume, but imagine hearing this in the middle of the woods. I was living in California and had a hobby of backpacking in the Sespe wilderness. I liked the adventure, I suppose. There is everything out there from bear to Mexican cartel drug grows, but I wasn't ready for what I found. The wilderness is huge, over 200,000 acres. You could walk for days and never see anyone. On this trip, I was going out for 3 days. I'm a young man, mid-20s, and I was going with a lifelong friend, Tom, who's in his 40s. I've known him all my life. So one sunny Friday afternoon, we meet up after work and hit the trail. The trip was going well, until the second day had come. Camp is set up and we're hiking along a creek after breakfast. Creeks are nice for hiking because they let you get off the beaten trail, but it's hard to get lost. Anyway, Tom and I are hiking along the creek when we saw a cabin. Not a log cabin, but an almost large shed. Being that we're on public land, we knew it had to be one of the very few forest ranger outposts. When we approach a cabin, we announce ourselves but don't get a reply. We then see a large water reservoir next to the cabin, so we get some water and knock on the door. We walk 2 steps, stand on the small porch and knock on the door. The door swung in when Tom knocked. There was no one home. It was obvious that a ranger did not live here. There's a kitchen area. No one home. There's a Nazi flag. And a desk and book. We went in and everything was very clean, but worn. We look around. Tom walked over to a closet near the bed while I snooped through the desk. There were some white power books, Arcanist cookbook, and some other things on the shelves. On the desk I found the most interesting thing of all. It was a double-edged axe head. Engraved on it was, "I was there and not you," and the date is 1983. I show the axe head to Tom and ask him, "What's in the closet?" and he said nothing but combat figures, a Ziploc bag full of blonde hair. At that time, we knew we had to leave. I turned to the door and held the axe in my hand. I wondered what it meant. I think it's weird too because I have blonde hair. Now, I put it back on the desk. I see what appears to be blood in the corner. It's old dried blood, but definitely blood. Now after camping, we go and make some food. That night, we traded man stories and I climb into my sleeping bag. It's a beautiful night under the stars. In the morning, I wake up. I can feel a weight on my chest. I look down and see a stack of things on my chest. It was my wallet, my ID, and some writing that said, 83, you better run. Needless to say, we got out of there and never come back again. This encounter happened when I was about 12 or 13. And with my best friend who was 3 years younger than me. The town we grew up in was incredibly safe, and it was very unusual for us to ever feel unsafe for the most part. The two of us often hung out in the local park down the street from our home. The park is quite large and open and backed onto an overgrown field and a small little wilderness type area. On this particular day, we were hanging out on top of a giant metal slide which had a great view of the whole park and the field that lied at the back of it. We're sitting there chatting away, and I noticed something blue along the tree line between the field and wilderness. I notice it move closer and figure it's someone walking a dog or something in the field. The figure just stands there for a while, not moving, just standing perfectly still. I start getting a little creeped out and point out the person to my friend. She starts yelling at the person, "Hey, Smurf man, we aren't afraid of you," because she's an idiot. Suddenly the figure starts moving towards us, getting closer, moving quite fast now. We freak out and hightail it home as fast as we can. That afternoon, I'm out delivering my newspapers and I walk past the park and can still see a blue figure now in the park, but still far back. It seems like we're being followed. The next day, as I'm preparing my newspapers, I read one article and see someone escaped from prison and attempted to abduct a young girl. He's then described as wearing a blue windbreaker, blue cap, and blue jeans, considered dangerous. A shiver now ran through my entire body because I know that's who was stalking us. I told my mum and she thought I was nuts because the guy had escaped from prison a few towns over and it seems impossible for him to have travelled that far. She called the police to give the tip anyway. They also seemed skeptical that he'd be out of town. However, a few days later, he's apprehended in a different park in our town trying to abduct another girl. It is by far the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. I still get awful vibes when I stand in parks on my own. This happened to me over 30 years ago, but I still remember the feeling of fear as though it were yesterday. I was in college, female, and taking a course in outdoor survival. The course ended with a 3-day, 3-night wilderness solo. We were allowed to take a backpack, empty canteen, sleeping bag, knife, 6 matches, rope, a sheet of plastic, clothes, extra stocks. Hail zone tablets, small cooking pot and spoon. No forks. We're not allowed to bring food or water since part of our training is identifying edibles and finding a water source. Once I was dropped off, I had to hike to find a spot to set up camp. First I had to place a flag on a tree near my drop-off point so that I could be located 3 days later. Now I'm loving life, just me and nature. I had no fears. Even as night began to fall, I enjoyed the sounds of the woods all around me and didn't mind not having a tent. I built a small fire, had a great feeling of peace. I slept well, but woke up thirsty. My search for water began. Happily, I found a muddy stream, let the water settle in my pot, place the tablets in and boil it. And it had a crappy taste, but at least I'm hydrated now. All went well. I have a great time until my last day. It was early in the afternoon. I clear up my camp, hiking out to my drop-off location. As I sat there, leant up against a tree, I heard the sound of a vehicle off in the distance. I figured that it had to be my pickup. Now as I'm waiting, a vehicle that I've never seen before pulls up in front of me. Immediately I realise that I do not know the man driving. He gives me an odd look. My gut tells me it's bad news. He says, "Hey, what are you doing there? And am I alone?" I then said, "Well, my friends are breaking camp behind me." He then gave me a wink, got into his vehicle and rode off. He then stopped, looked as though he's gonna come around. I didn't bother looking back. I was terrified. I knew I had to hide. I can hear his engine start. I ran into the woods and hid. As I ran, I hear him come past where I was originally standing. I stay quiet and remain hidden. I can hear him calling out to me walking through the brush. I'm so afraid. He says I'm gonna regret this and that he's coming back with more. I hear the car door slam, the engine start and him pull away. Going back to my drop-off point is now not an option, so I began hiking through the woods, hoping I would find base camp. After walking for what felt like hours, I see a forest ranger. I told him who I was and what happened to me. He told me I'd done the right thing because a young girl had been brutally attacked the night before, and the police and forest service had been searching the area. Luckily he drove me to the base camp where I learnt that another girl in my class had another encounter with that guy, but also ran away. If there's anything to be learned from this, it's sure to always trust your gut and never camp alone. My friends and I decided to go camping one spring break. We had planned a week in advance, and as the day got closer, the weather turns worse. It's cold and grey, unheard of for Kansas. The night finally came along with yet another cold front. It was in the 30s, but we had dressed warm, stocked up on whiskey and beer. The plan was to hit a spot that we knew about. It's barely accessible by a 4x4. We wanted to really camp, none of those designated sites for families and seniors in RVs. We aimed to be very far away from civilization, which was only made up by a single spotlight and a couple of hundred people that drove into the woods. After 30 minutes of bone-rattling dips across dry creek beds and detours around trees, it starts to rain. By the time we find camp, it turns to hell. The spot was marked by an ancient dirt road with a few hundred feet of log-in roads and rotting carcasses. That night, we passed a bottle round, hoping we'd figure out the tents before we're too drunk. Eventually we do, and manage to start a fire with diesel. At this point the howl had stopped, and the empty whiskey bottle lay broken in the fire, and we had a decent pile of empty growing. We drank, played cards, and passed out in our tents. The next morning I gradually regained consciousness to the sound of something large being dragged past my tent. It was what looked to have once been a station wagon, stripped and rust covered, dragging the VW with a chain. The VW had been there for so long that the floor had rotted out, and roots had tied it to the forest floor. They lay scattered in the wake of the wagon. A woman is driving, a man's beside her, and 3 shirtless kids sat in the back where there used to be seats. The man stared out of the window away from us the whole time. The children had dirt smeared on their faces, which illuminates part of them, and you can see their 1,000-mile stares. It's really weird. I don't like it. It's the look of crushing poverty that you've only seen in pictures existing in war-torn countries. The projects in inner cities and deep south. They then start talking to us. You'll come from the city to do some camping. Well, that's fine as long as you ain't doing no drugs. You ain't doing drugs, are ya? No, we aren't. They say just drinking then. Hell, I like a drink now and then my darn self. That's fine, that's just... You'll want to know something about here. Have you seen them black helicopters flying around? Then some boys at work for me. This is my land, and they told me that you can't be too careful, so I figured I'd check it out. She then begins laughing. She then says, "You'll know Bethany?" We don't. Everyone knows her. You'll go church. I lie and say yes. She says, "Good. I ain't got no time for those that don't fear God. Why don't you come to the church tomorrow? It's in the basement. You can meet Bethany. It's just over there up the hill. You can't miss it." Boy, sure she'd like to meet you all. They all would. We assure her we would. She drove away into the trees, slowly dragging the VW. As soon as she left, we all look at each other and start laughing. Very nervously. We all have the remnants of a primitive warning system for danger. It's been eroded by living safe and civilized, but every once in a while, you know when something's wrong. I mean, everything about this situation's just wrong, and we're miles away from help. I mean, heck, this is the only person we've seen out here, and we definitely don't want to go into the basement for whatever lied there for us. We decide right then and there to pack up and leave and never come back again. Hello everyone. I'm very unwell at the minute, so sorry I've not been able to upload much this week. I'm on the up though, and should be back to normal in the following days. Let me know what kind of stories you'd like to see me do. Hope you'll enjoy this video. Let's begin. This is actually my stepmom / her best friend story. Now my stepmom, we'll call her Mancy, grew up as kind of a privileged teen in the 70s. Her mum and her family had moved over here, the States, from England when she's about 9. She went to a pretty nice high school in a really nice town. There, she made friends with a girl Lily, who didn't exactly run with Nancy's type of crowd. They hit it off, and Lily would take Nancy out to do her type of stuff. Hiking, fishing and sailing. Anyway, because of Lily's influence, the two of them would go and do stuff like that a good amount. One Sunday, they decide to hike in some hills about an hour away Mancy then puts on what I'm sure were her extremely expensive hiking shoes, and the two of them drove off to the hiking trails. Lily parked in the big clearing with the makeshift parking spots, but there's no other cars there. This was only important in hindsight. They started hiking up the hill, off the path, because Lily fancied herself as a badass. This hiking was nothing extraordinary. Anyway, they reach the top of the hill and my stepmom is done. The polished, pampered side of her was coming out and she groaned until Lily said okay, they're gonna rest, then walk, but slower. They had started down the hill for maybe only 10 minutes when Mancy started moaning again. Lily conceded to walking down the side of the road instead of the rough hiking trail Pryor picked. So there they are, probably looking like a couple of tools geared up for some hiking and walking down a crappy road. And after not even 5 minutes, a truck pulled up next to them. It's red and rusty, and just generally looks like a clunker. The guy rolled down the window, and the girls look in through the passenger side window. He had a big beard, baseball cap pulled down, long brown hair. He greeted them, even smiling through his beard, asking if they needed a ride. Mancy describes him as charming, even cute. Lily still says the moment he greeted them, chills went up her spine. But despite her better judgment, my stepmom convinces her to get in the truck, saying it's only going to be a 10-minute drive tops. The two girls now open the passenger side door to the old rusty thing, the guy directing them to the back seat. They settle in, and the truck goes forward. Lily always says this is a point when it hit her that they made a big mistake. The back seat was clean enough, but there's rope on the floor, and 4 boxes of saran wrap hanging out from under the passenger seat. It seems kind of creepy but weird. Very out of place. But Lily didn't want to freak out my stepmom, keeping quiet. After 10 minutes, the woods don't look any clearer. They hadn't seen another car the whole time. Lily asking how long he thought it'd be. He said he's going to take a different route down the hill and had to stop somewhere first. That was it. Now the girls were about 18 at the time and Lily didn't want to press the issue. She was scared. Now she could remember his hair because she's sitting behind him. It was very tangled and dirty. She noticed crusted mud on his collar. Trying to find something identifiable about him, getting scared the more she picks up on details. He was youngish, strong looking, had a 1 on both of them, so they didn't ask any more questions, and he didn't offer any information and they drove on. Several minutes after that, they reach a tiny shack / log cabin looking place right in a clearing. There was an old stump where someone had been cutting wood down with a huge axe and with a log. Lily's on red alert now. The guy turned off the truck and slipped out saying, "I'll be right back, don't get out," and he goes to the house. Lily tried to speak to my stepmom about how incredibly uncomfortable she is, but she mostly dismisses it. Lily begins laughing, increasingly freaked out, finally putting her foot down, demanding Mancy exits the truck with her. So when they get out and walk around the front of the vehicle, they're now found to be about 50 yards away from the house. The guy would have left 2 young girls in the truck alone while going into his house. So they wander around, looking at it hesitantly. If the guy's really decent, he is just giving us a ride, then it'd be super rude for us to run off, right? My stepmom had this strict upbringing when it comes to manners and public persona, and she saw it as an issue of that nature, so she actually started to head back to the truck, opening the front door to climb in the driver's seat. Lily's mad now though, and yells at her. Oh, the driver's side door. Just under it, by the seat, you can see a big hatchet. It's covered in red and brown stains, like the floor. Lily's uncomfortable and starts losing it. My stepmom starts getting hysterical. They decide to leave. They're gonna book it off to the side of the property, into the trees. They bumped around in the trees for a little while until Lily was fairly confident they're on their way back down the hill. My stepmom cried all the way down, Lily feeling bad about it, but completely freaked out. When they finally got back down to the bottom and saw the old wooden fence that surrounded the original parking area, they were relieved. As they got closer, they saw it. The truck, parked on the other side of the gravelly makeshift lot, just sitting there facing the other way innocently. They couldn't see if anyone's in it, and of course Mancy wanted to run for the car, but Lily's hesitant. She managed to calm down my stepmom, saying she wanted to wait before running out into the open to see what's out there. Remember, it's the 70s, no cell phones. There was no ranger station around or any park rangers. The parking lot was big and empty. Who knows what would have happened if they decided to stroll across it. Thankfully, Lily convinces my stepmom to chill, and the two of them hunker down against a big tree, hidden by bushes and the other trees, and waited it out for what seemed to be a couple of hours. When dark starts to fall, all the animals start coming out and making sounds, and my stepmom predictably started getting antsy and began bothering Lily, who was tired, and moves away, giving in. She was just planning their dash to the car when they hear a loud bang sound across the twilight lit lot. They watch as one of the back doors to the car swings open, and a bearded guy jumps out. He got out, shut the door, looking around for a few moments, then getting back in his truck. The truck lumbers past their car and out of sight. They can tell he's about to do a loop and come back. They wait until he's around a corner, then sprint into their cars, peeling out as fast as they can. They never went on expeditions like this again, but also never reported it to the authorities. Okay, so let me start by saying I'm a 23-year-old. At the time of this story, I was 19, 5'5", fat girl from England. My weight and country come into play later. So I would take my dog for walks at night. That was until this experience. Now, it's not the kind of dark where you can't see anything, but the kind where you can't make out much further in front of you. As a disclaimer, this is the middle of nowhere. We're in a village where everyone knows each other and strangers are rarely spotted. Now, a fair few of my neighbours walk late at night, and I meet most of them, and there's usually this 6'3", heavily tattooed 46-year-old man with two friendly big dogs, one Mastiff and another German Shepherd. We were great friends and still are. Now, on this particular night, I bumped into him, just ending his walk, which happened to be a couple of times, and it's no big worry. I'm around half an hour into my 45-minute walk in the woods, earphones in with music playing and just checking my phone to see what song's on next. I notice my dog is looking up as if he can see something. I assume it's another neighbour, fox or deer. I looked up calmly and I see a strange man standing about 20 foot away from me, holding a rifle. Not a dog. It wasn't hunting season, and this is England, so you can't really get guns unless you're a farmer, let alone a rifle. He looks angry and stares at me. At this point, I remembered my head torch, and he turns to look at me. He angles himself to my face, and at this point, I knew I couldn't turn around or run since I'm out of shape. I carry on walking, As we go past, my dog gives him a wide berth, which is very unusual because he's normally friendly and loves everyone. I'm very confused by this. Now, I shuffle past him and say evening. I try and speed walk out of there. I look over my shoulder as I'm about to leave the woods. I saw he hasn't moved an inch and he's still staring at me. I never walked alone at night again. This freaked me out so much because it never happened since and there's no hunters near me. I'm certain he was not meant to have that gun. And I'm sure I've heard a gun go off at some point around the time of my travels near then. Back in the early 90s, I was a kid, around 13 at the time of the incident. I used to stay at my grandparents' house a lot, out in a very rural area in SE, Arkansas. When I say very rural, I mean it was a series of networked dirt roads to get to their house. The closest neighbours besides my aunt and uncle, who lived about a quarter of a mile off a dirt road, was a mile away. This was very backwards and isolated from the rest of civilization. The closest town was a 10-mile trip away. It's in the middle of farmland and mostly woods. They had lived up in this house since my mum was a child and had both grown up a ways down the dirt road. Anyway, there was a general store roughly 3 or 4 miles down the network of dirt roads. Now this is your typical country dirt road shop. It's run by an old lady and her husband, and its customers only consisted of people who lived out there. Now one day, my grandmother said to me if I wanted to walk to the general store and get some milk, eggs and a few other miscellaneous items. I said sure. She gave me some money and I headed on my way. Now it was fairly early in the day and I had plenty of time to get back before dark, which I always made sure to do when I was out roaming. Things can get pretty creepy out in the backwoods of Arkansas after nightfall. It's a darkness unlike most people have actually experienced before, due to no light pollution, and not really many street lamps. Now me being a 13-year-old, had poor time management skills. I stopped at the bottom of a hill next to the small wooden bridge you have to cross and messed around at the creek creating crawdads and such. By the time I left the store, I realised it was quickly approaching night. This was fall and darkness set upon the land very early. I didn't want to be walking these lonely roads, especially not through the woods, so I go as quick as I can. I'm running and sprinting as much as possible, but it's not enough. By the time I'd made it back to the bottom of the hill near the ridge, it's almost completely dark, and there was an eerie sort of glow brought about by a very bright nearly full moon that was rising. At the top of the hill was a road that's perfectly straight and flat, with the woods on the left side and a large hill on the right. About half a mile up from the top of the hill is my grandparents' house, and you can see it from there. As I top the hill, I can see the faint glow of lights at their house. I'm starting to feel a little bit better now, but I'm still not feeling very good. The field on the right was somewhat illuminated by the glow of the moon, and my eyes have only just adjusted to the darkness. As I walk up the road, I hear something from the left, behind me on the wooded side of the road. It sounded like leaves being rustled. I turned around and see nothing at first, but then, as my eyes began to focus, I see something in the ditch, a black shadowy shape slowly moving towards me. At first I think it's a dog, but then I realise it's way too large to be one. And then I realise it wasn't actually walking on 4 legs, it was kind of crawling, like a person. I stare for a moment, out of sheer confusement, trying to figure out what I was seeing, and then a jolt of fear shudders me as it dawns on me. Whatever this thing was had been trying to sneak up on me for a while. At that exact moment, this thing stood upright out of the ditch on its 2 feet like a normal person. It had the shape of a human, but long arms, legs and such. It stood roughly 7 to 8 feet in height and was completely covered in black or maybe dark brown hair. Its face is dark in colour, and I can't really recall seeing much in the way of features. It was no bear, that's for certain, or any other kind of animal that I know for that matter. I immediately dropped the bag of stuff I'd been carrying and bolted as fast as I could, trying to get towards my grandparents' house. I heard a heavy breathing and weird sound behind me, hearing footsteps on the gravel as whatever this thing is starts to chase me. Now, I didn't turn around to look because I didn't need to. I can hear it crashing into the woods, earth-shattering, and some ungodly scream coming out of that thing, a sound I've never heard before. By the time I reached my grandparents, my heart felt as though it was about to explode from my chest. It's a type of adrenaline that I've never had before. I must have been sprinting as fast as possible for half a mile. I flew into the house and, in an incoherent mess of hyperactive gibberish, tried to explain to my grandparents what happened. My grandmother didn't really seem to believe me, but did believe something scared me, which annoyed me, thinking it was some kind of dog. The next morning I woke up, and I can see my grandpa sitting outside on the porch, whittling wood underneath the shaded tree in front of the yard, as he often does. I went and sat down beside him in one of the old metal lawn chairs. He's a very rational man, down to earth, grown up and hunted in that area his entire life. He knew every square inch of it, mapped out into his mind. He knew every type of critter and creature that lived in the woods, what noises they made, where to find them and how to catch them, etc. I'd only been hunting with him for a couple of years, but had been going out into these woods with him since I was pretty young, going on walks and such. He had passed a lot of knowledge down to me during those adventures. I spoke to him about what happened, and told him I knew what I saw. I wasn't being over exaggerative, and it wasn't due to my imagination. I wasn't making it up. And it definitely wasn't a dog. He knew that I wasn't some dumb 13-year-old kid. He knew what I saw was real. He stopped whittling, looked me right in the eyes and said, "I know what you saw. I've seen it there before too. There's something out in them woods that people don't understand, and that's someone that you don't want to mess with." I remember those words very clearly to those days, because it gave me affirmation, but at the same time made me realise that whatever I'd seen was very real in existence, and beyond my understanding. My grandpa then went on to tell me that far back in the woods, there are some cliffs at the bottom of these cliffs in a cave. He told me that cave is where the creature lived. He once stumbled upon it a long time ago while hunting. He said he was standing on the top of the cliff looking at the creature fitting the same description, and it emerged and began to scream, throwing rocks at him. He said he took a shot at it, missed, and then this thing chased him. My grandpa was on top of the cliff, so in order to get back, he had to run a distance, but luckily he managed to put some good space between them. He said the whole way back home, he felt as though he was being watched, and kept hearing twigs snap behind him. He was certain that it was following him, stalking him. He made it home, and as he reached his front porch, he turns to look towards the trees, and he can see this thing peeking out behind a tree staring at him. Later that night, he said that my grandmother awoke in the early hours of morning to find large rocks being thrown at the house, as well as hearing an unholy sound screeching out of the creature. He said he could hear it walking around on the front porch, rattling the doorknobs, banging on the windows, and it sounded like it was muttering to itself in a low, deep voice. But it didn't sound like a normal language, just a bunch of gibberish. After a while, that thing went back to throwing some more rocks and howling. So my grandpa grabbed his shotgun and fired it off, and into the darkness where this thing's running into the woods. Now, He didn't know if he'd hit it or not. He said that was the last time he ever saw or heard from it. However, over the years, farmers would report cows being mutilated, or someone's hunting dog would go unexplainably missing, or somebody would have a story about some strange creature they'd seen. He said it only scared my grandmother beyond words, and she absolutely refused to talk about it ever or even acknowledge that it happened, which explains her acting weird about it when I told her. I know it's a pretty far-fetched story, but please believe me, this is true. And till this day, I've never actually spoken of it to anyone other than my grandpa.